The Secrets of Mojave, or The Conspiracy Against Reality, 7th edition, compiled by the group. Edited by Branton. The author of the following story is a Navajo Indian. He revealed this tribal secret which he learned from the Paiute Indians, who inhabit the Great Basin and Mojave deserts of Utah, Nevada, and California. This Native American, who went by the name Ogamake, related the following account in appreciation for a story on the Navajo which appeared in the spring of 1948 in a magazine which was carrying numerous articles on the mysterious signs or fires in the skies which were causing an enormous amount of confusion and debate during that same year, as well as the years following. The article on the Navajo Nation, which appeared in an earlier issue, told of the suffering that their tribe had gone through during past winter seasons, and encouraged the readership to send goods and supplies to help them through the upcoming winter of *48-*49, which many of them did. In appreciation of this, Ogamake related the following legend which told of the secret history of the Americas which ran its course, possibly thousands of years before white men set their foot en masse upon its shores. Most of you who read this are probably white men of the blood only a century or two out of Europe. You speak in your papers of the flying saucers or mystery ships as something new, and strangely typical of the 20th century. How could you but think otherwise? Yet if you had red skin, and were of a blood which had been born and bred of the land for untold thousands of years, you would know this is not true. You would know that your ancestors living in these mountains and upon these prairies for numberless generations, had seen these ships before, and had passed down the story in the legends which are the unwritten history of your people. You do not believe. Well, after all, why should you? But knowing your scornful unbelief, the storytellers of my people have closed their lips in bitterness against the outward flow of this knowledge. Yet, I have said to the storytellers this, now that the ships are being seen again, is it wise that we, the elder race, keep our knowledge to ourselves? Thus for me, an American Indian, some of the sages among my people have talked. And if you care to, I shall permit you to sit down with us and listen. Let us say that it is dusk in that strange place which you, the white man, calls Death Valley. I have passed tobacco to the aged chief of the Paiutes, who sits across a tiny fire from me and sprinkles cornmeal upon the flames. The old chief looked like a wrinkled mummy as he sat there puffing upon his pipe. Yet his eyes were not those of the unseeing, but eyes which seemed to look back on long trails of time. His people had held the Inyo, Panamint and Death Valleys for untold centuries before the coming of the white man. Now we sat in the valley which white man named for death, but which the Paiute calls Tomesha, the Flaming Land. Here before me as I faced eastward, the funerals mountains forming Death Valley's eastern wall were wrapped in purple-blue blankets about their feet while their faces were painted in scarlet. Behind me, the Panamints rose like a mile-high wall, dark against the sinking sun. The old Paiute smoked my tobacco for a long time before he reverently blew the smoke to the four directions. Finally he spoke. You ask me if we heard of the great silver airships in the days before white man brought his wagon trains into the land? Yes, grandfather, I come seeking knowledge. Among all tribes of my people, grandfather is the term of greatest respect which one man can pay to another. We, the Paiute nation, have known of these ships for untold generations. We also believe that we know something of the people who fly them. They are called the Havmasuvs. Who are the Havmasuvs? They are a people of the Panamints, and they are as ancient as Tomesha itself. He smiled a little at my confusion. You do not understand. Of course not. You are not a Paiute. Then listen closely and I will lead you back along the trail of the dim past. When the world was young, and this valley which is now dry, parched desert, was a lush, hidden harbor of a blue water sea which stretched from halfway up those mountains to the Gulf of California. It is said that the Havmasuvs came here in huge rowing ships. They found great caverns in the Panamints, and in them they built one of their cities. At that time California was the island which the Indians of that state told the Spanish it was, and which they marked so on their maps. Living in their hidden city, the Havmasuvs ruled the sea with their fast-rowing ships, trading with faraway peoples and bringing strange goods to the great quays said still to exist in the caverns. Then as untold centuries rolled past, the climate began to change. The water in the lake went down until there was no longer a way to the sea. First the way was broken only by the southern mountains, over the tops of which goods could be carried. But as time went by, the water continued to shrink, until the day came when only a dry crust was all that remained of the great blue lake. Then the desert came, and the fire god began to walk across Tomesha, The Flaming Land. When the Havamasuvs could no longer use their great rowing ships, they began to think of other means to reach the world beyond. I suppose that is how it happened. We know that they began to use flying canoes. At first they were not large, these silvery ships with wings. They moved with a slight whirring sound, and a dipping movement, like an eagle. The passing centuries brought other changes. Tribe after tribe swept across the land, fighting to possess it for a while and passing like the storm of sand. In their mountain city still in the caverns, the Havamasuvs dwelt in peace, far removed from the conflict. Sometimes they were seen in the distance, in their flying ships or riding on the snowy white animals which took them from ledge to ledge up the cliffs. We have never seen these strange animals at any other place. To these people the passing centuries brought only larger and larger ships, moving always more silently. Have you ever seen a Havamasuv? No, but we have many stories of them. There are reasons why one does not become too curious. Reasons? Single quote yes. These strange people have weapons. One is a small tube which stuns one with a prickly feeling like a rain of cactus needles. One cannot move for hours, and during this time the mysterious ones vanish up the cliffs. The other weapon is deadly. It is a long, silvery tube. When this is pointed at you, death follows immediately. But tell me about these people. What do they look like and how do they dress? They are a beautiful people. Their skin is a golden tint, and a headband holds back their long dark hair. They dress always in a white fine-spun garment which wraps around them and is draped upon one shoulder. Pale sandals are worn upon their feet. His voice trailed away in a puff of smoke. The purple shadows rising up the walls of the funeral splashed like the waves of the ghost lake. The old man seemed to have fallen into a sort of trance, but I had one more question. Has any Paiute ever spoken to a Havamasuv, or were the Paiutes here when the great rowing ships first appeared? For some moments I wondered if he had heard me. Yet as is our custom, I waited patiently for the answer. Again he went through the ritual of the smoke breathing to the four directions, and then his soft voice continued, single quote yes. Once in the not-so-distant past, but yet many generations before the coming of the Spanish, a Paiute chief lost his bride by sudden death. In his great and overwhelming grief, he thought of the Havamasuvs and their long tube of death. He wished to join her, so he bid farewell to his sorrowing people and set off to find the Havamasuvs. None appeared until the chief began to climb the almost unscalable Panamints. Then one of the men in white appeared suddenly before him with the long tube, and motioned him back. The chief made signs that he wished to die, and came on. The man in white made a long singing whistle and other Havamasuvs appeared. They spoke together in a strange tongue and then regarded the chief thoughtfully. Finally they made signs to him making him understand that they would take him with them. Many weeks after his people had mourned him for dead, the Paiute chief came back to his camp. He had been in the giant underground valley of the Havamasuvs, he said, where white lights which burn night and day and never go out, or need any fuel, lit an ancient city of marble beauty. There he learned the language and the history of the mysterious people, giving them in turn the language and legends of the Paiutes. He said that he would have liked to remain there forever in the peace and beauty of their life, but they bade him return and use his new knowledge for his people. I could not help but ask the inevitable. Do you believe this story of the chief? His eyes studied the wisps of smoke for some minutes before he answered. I do not know. When a man is lost in Tomesha, and the fire god is walking across the salt crust, strange dreams like clouds fog through his mind. No man can breathe the hot breath of the fire god and long remain sane. Of course, the Paiutes have thought of this. No people knows the moods of Tomesha better than they. You asked me to tell you the legend of the flying ships. I have told you what the young men of the tribe do not know, for they no longer listen to the stories of the past. Now you ask me if I believe. I answer this. Turn around. Look behind you at that wall of the Panamints. How many giant caverns could open there, being hidden by the lights and shadows of the rocks? How many could open outward or inward and never be seen behind the arrow-like pinnacles before them? How many ships could swoop down like an eagle from the beyond, on summer nights when the fires of the furnace sands have closed away the valley from the eyes of the white men? How many Havamasuvs could live in their eternal peace away from the noise of white men's guns in their unscalable stronghold? This has always been a land of mystery. Nothing can change that. Not even white man with his flying engines, for should they come too close to the wall of the Panamints a sharp wind like the flying arrow can shear off a wing. Tomesha hides its secrets well even in winter, but no man can pry into them when the fire god draws the hot veil of his breath across the passes. I must still answer your question with my mind in doubt, for we speak of a weird land. White man does not yet know it as well as the Paiutes, and we have ever held it in awe. It is still the forbidden Tomish land of the flaming earth. The preceding account, titled Tribal Memories of the Flying Saucers, appeared in the September 1949 issue of Fate magazine. Coincidentally or not, this same legend was repeated in amazing similarity by an old prospector by the name of Burke Lee in his book Death Valley Men, Macmillan Company, New York, 1932. However, Lee stated that it was not a legend, but an actual account of the discovery of a now abandoned city within the Panamint Mountains, as he heard it from 3 other people who claimed to have seen this ancient wonder beneath the earth. Believe it or not, those who talked to Burke Lee mentioned the ancient lake within Death Valley, the ancient city within the Panamints themselves, and even the large tunnel-like quays or ancient boat docks above the ancient shoreline on the eastern slope of the Panamints, which led into the ancient city. Ancient artifacts which they swore they saw with their own eyes. The editors of Fate magazine introduced the story, which appears above, with the following words. Fate presents 2 new saucer stories in this issue. The first is a startling account of an aviation editor's encounter with Tutisks 2 weeks after he had photographed 4 and was frustrated in every attempt to get the photo into the big dailies and thus prove the flying saucers were real at the height of the scare. And the second is a tribal secret of the Paiute Indians given to Fate magazine out of appreciation for Fate's Navajo story in the spring 1948 issue, which helped relieve their hardship in the ensuing winter. Your editor wonders about these stories, and presents them as a possible solution of the nature and origin of the famous discs. Both these stories arrived on our desk on the same day. They corroborate each other. We say that investigation will prove both to be true. We admit, however, that we believe it will be as impossible to prove the Havasu story as it has been to produce a captive disc. Your editor, however, has been a friend of the American Indian for many years, and he has rarely known an Indian to lie. He is convinced of the sincerity of the story we present in this issue, and that it has not been distorted. What does it mean? What, really, are the Havasus? The story of the Havasu seems to be a major or key piece of the overall puzzle of a wide range of aerial as well as subsurface phenomena which have mystified numerous researchers throughout this century. Not the least of these unusual phenomena were the so-called contactees of California, who during the 1950s and '60s, in fact, described their own alleged encounters with benevolent human-like beings who were seen to emerge from aerial discs, not far at all from the mysterious Panamint Mountains themselves. The Mojave Desert is also, believe it or not, the very place where William Shatner claimed to have had his UFO encounter with a silvery disc, which he alleges saved his life after he became lost in the Mojave's otherworldly expanse, and this long before he was christened captain of the U.S. Enterprise. The Mojave Desert of California is in this sense perhaps one of the most interesting areas in the world where his encounters with strange aerial phenomena are concerned. In certain small California and Mojave Desert towns, like the small town of Anza for instance, one is more likely to be called crazy for not believing in UFOs than they are for believing in them. Sightings have been so numerous over the years that these aerial visitors are an accepted fact of life. The interesting thing, however, is that the 2 most commonly reported types of occupants, which are described by thousands of witnesses with remarkable consistency the world over in relation to these aerial phenomena, play a large part in the Mojave Desert scenario as well. These are the 2 groups which have often been referred to as the Saurian Greys and the Nordic Blondes. Both types of entities have appeared in many accounts describing encounters with not only so-called extraterrestrial beings, but also the lesser-known, although nevertheless persistent, accounts of intraterrestrial beings as well. In this file we will document numerous accounts which seem to suggest that the Nordics may be our ancient ancestors who, a few thousand years previous to the modern space race, may have attained the science and technology necessary to burrow deep into the earth in order to construct vast subterranean technological metropolises, and shortly thereafter, like a slingshot from the lower depths of the earth, they may have hurled themselves in starships of their own devising through the interplanetary and perhaps even interstellar depths of space. The strange allegation among ufologists, however, is one mentioned by many contactees who allege that a neo-sauroid or reptilian race known as the Greys may have for hundreds, if not thousands of years been in conflict, or even in all-out warfare with the so-called Nordics, as we will see further on, The Nordic appellation may be closer to the truth than one might think. The explanation given by some researchers as to the actual origin of this malevolent and predatory other race of grayish aliens may shock you. Since national polls reveal that approximately 80% of all Americans believe in the phenomenon known as UFOs to some degree, and that as many as 2% or 1 in 50 believe that they have been targets of abduction by the same in the past, this file is written with the assumption that the reader is one of the 80% and possibly even one of the 2% who have experiential knowledge of the UFO phenomena. If the reader believes that they are part of the 20% who do not believe in UFOs and have no desire to do so, then the following may not be for you. If one does not like the idea of having the very fabric of their concept of reality torn apart and woven back together again, then they might do well to pass on this information to someone with a more open mind. But if you desire to bear with us, we will reveal to you the hidden secrets of one place on Earth which appears to be a doorway to other worlds, to worlds and realities and adventures which may well make the reader's own perception of reality seem absolutely mundane to the extreme. But if you dare, then read on. George H. Leonard, in his book Somebody Else is on the Moon, David McKay Company Incorporated, New York, 1967, quotes Morris K. Jessup, the ufologist who died under mysterious circumstances after exposing the so-called Philadelphia experiment, who asked the question, who has beaten us to the moon by hundreds or even thousands of years? Leonard, based on research gathered by himself and certain ex-NASA employees, confirms the suspicions of certain researchers to the effect that NASA is aware of the fact that an alien race, the Greys, etc., and a human-like race has for centuries been fighting for possession of the moon, that mining equipment has been seen as well as many other evidences of lunar activity. Leonard says, more than one race occupies the moon. Culture traits and technology seen in different parts of the moon vary considerably. It appears from the body of reliable data that one or more of the non-human races regards us with disdain and values human life cheaply. Races capable of moving between star systems and existing on the moon must be capable of wiping us out at will. It is probably this, understandably, which panics the military. Mr. Leonard, during one of his interviews with an ex-NASA employee whom he refers to as Dr. Sam Whitcomb, a pseudonym to protect his real identity, at which time he showed Whitcomb the myth for his book, learned the following disturbing facts. And Sam Whitcomb read my manuscript in draft and then sat staring into the black night. When he spoke, it was in a hushed voice. I'd never heard him like that before. They brought scientists together from many countries in the spring of 1975. The meeting was in England. They wanted to talk on the quiet about extraterrestrials and what they're up to. A lot of people at the top are scared. A cold spot formed in the small of my back. Sam turned to me. They invited a physicist from Colorado, a man named Joachim Kuttner, who'd worked on the moon program and knows what's up there. He could tell them about it firsthand. About the frenetic building and digging going on, the spraying of craters and carving up of crater rims and ridges. I don't know exactly what they talked about. But you can bet they know it's not Earth people's moon anymore, if it ever was. It belongs to them. As we've said, at least one of the races on the moon is human, or identical to those of us on Earth. If this is so, then we might ask ourselves, where on Earth did these people come from, and how did they get to the moon before we did? It is certainly a reasonable question. There exist several corroborative accounts taken from ancient Hindu scripts, again, as Ripley would say, believe it or not, which we will quote shortly, stating that the ancient Greeks had actually developed flying ships thousands of years ago. Is it possible that the Havmasuvs, which as we've said, may have been a Neo-Grecian race because of their dress and their marble-like cities, would have taken the next logical step after developing aerial travel, that is, attempt to land one or more of their kind on the moon, eventually upon Mars, and possibly even later upon planets in a nearby star system? The United States has made incredible advances in this area in a period of less than 100 years, thanks to the phenomenon known as the technological curve, that is, that a synchronous effort on the part of many contributing factors eventually leads to a multiplying explosion in technology. If America landed a man on the moon only 70 years after the Wright brothers opened the skies to aerial travel, then can we expect anything less from the Havmasuvs or others like them? For instance, technology in our society is becoming thousands of times more sophisticated every year. Is it possible that the ancient Greeks or a similar ancient society had a technology explosion thousands of years ago? If so, then it may have been possible for them to establish bases or colonies on the moon, Mars, and perhaps beyond. We might add that there are some who even claim that the secret of hyperspace travel was inadvertently discovered only 40 years after the Wright brothers successfully tested their aircraft at Kitty Hawk, during a super-secret Navy experiment called the Rainbow Project, which was carried out at the Philadelphia Naval Harbor in 1943. If we can go from the horse and buggy to landing men on the moon in less than 100 years, or from the horse and buggy to hyperspace travel in only 40 years, then how much exploration and colonization of other planetary bodies might have taken place by a race who 3,000 or 4,000 years ago possessed the aerial craft and technologies equal to or greater than our own? One contactee, incidentally, has stated that a large spaceport does in fact exist in a network of caverns deep below present-day Death Valley. In reference to this, we will quote from a synopsis of the experiences of Brazilian contactee Jefferson Souza, as it appeared in a catalog put out by the UFO Library, 11684 Ventura Boulevard, number 708. Studio City, California, 91604. Many of the individuals referred to in this catalog, which offers taped interviews or lectures describing their encounters, are either contactees who have had friendly encounters with the so-called Nordic or human-like beings who pilot many of the alien craft, or who have been abducted by the more manipulating and predatory gray or saurian entities. Quoting from their description of Mr. Souza's experiences, reaction to the first sighting of a UFO is unpredictable. Jeff Souza had his first contact in 1979 when he was only 13. The memory of it was tucked away in the recesses of his mind. 20 alien contacts during the next 10 years never fully restored the image. But those years were filled with excitement that would result in one of the most inspirational stories of alien contact ever recorded. The young Brazilian was possessed of intelligence and intuition. He studied and managed to complete one semester of medical school before giving up his formal education. In contact with two races of extraterrestrials, Jeff has met them in Brazil, Argentina and the United States. But where they occurred is unimportant when compared to the depth and scope of what he learned. The gentle Vegans and the businesslike Amids taught Souza more than he could ever imagine about technology and life on all planets. He was transported aboard a spaceship by light anti-gravity rays, Branton, and taken to other planets and other parts of the world. On one such trip he suffered an unusual reaction. All his hair fell out. His watch broke at every contact. Jeff Souza has been questioned by experts in the field of alien contact. He has been clinically regressed through hypnotism to the time of his first contact, but the answers came only in Portuguese. At that age, Jeff could not speak English. The details he has learned are awe-inspiring. Answers to questions about time, space, matter, energy, life and spirituality easily rolled from his tongue. All prompted by the alien contacts of his past and present. His interview and the recorded details of his many physical contacts provide hitherto unknown information about several alien races, including the mysterious and threatening Greys. From Jeff Souza we learn about the 7 races, possibly humanoid and Dorsaurian, Branton, the alien name for Earth, a subterranean space station in Death Valley, and if AIDS might be cured by aliens. There is a final precaution from his contacts. We must now learn the lessons given to Jeff Souza because we are destroying our planet, and if we don't change, not even the friendly aliens will be able to save us. We see here then a definite connection between the subterranea of the Death Valley region, which is reportedly inhabited by the Neo-Grecian Havmasuvs, and the human societies Ain, Vega, and Umo, which, as we shall see later on, according to other contactees, are federated with other human colonies or civilizations in Tau Ceti, Epsilon Eridani, Alpha Centauri, the Pleiades and elsewhere. Although Jefferson Souza claims to have encountered the Umo people in landed craft, the Vegans are the ones who allowed him to travel on their craft most often. It was also the Vegans who showed him the massive basing complex below Death Valley, which contained chambers miles in diameter and numerous compartmentalized sectors which had been adapted to meet the gravitational, atmospheric and environmental needs of the various Federation world representatives who use the base as a way station for their operations on Earth. Apparently the Havmasuvs have been very busy for the last few thousand years, if we are to believe Souza's account. In addition to the above, Souza learned of 2 other alien species that are in conflict to some extent with the humanoids, with whom he maintained contact. One of these includes an insectoid-type race, while the other is reptilian. The latter consists of a tall, very reptilian saurian-appearing master race to which the shorter reptilian Greys are subservient. There are at least 3 types of Greys, according to Souza. those that reproduce via egg hatcheries, those that reproduce via cloning, those that reproduce via polyembryony. One might ask, if some of our ancient ancestors were so intelligent that they could develop aerial craft, then where's all the evidence? The evidence is there, but has been largely ignored by orthodox scientists who cannot fit the existence of advanced prehistoric civilizations into their own theoretical framework. For instance, ancient sophisticated artifacts discovered embedded in solid rock, including ancient spark plugs, metal cubes, gold chains, metal vases, nails, screws, and even electric batteries such as those described in René Norbergen's Secrets of the Lost Races, Bob's Material Company, New York, as well as artifacts found on the ocean floor, give evidence to the fact that our ancient ancestors were far more intelligent in the scientific realm than we give them credit for. Yvonneau, in his book UFOs and Extraterrestrials in History, Fernie Publishers, Geneva, Switzerland, 1978, describes one such artifact. In 1900, sponge divers near Antikythera, Greece, found rusty fragments of a metallic apparatus on the seafloor. Scientists at first thought that they were remnants of an astrolabe dating from 65 before Christ. In 1959, the English scientist, Sola Price, made a discovery which astounded the professional world. When he published it in the Natural History Review of March 1962, it appears that this object is really a computer which can determine and describe the movements of the sun, of the moon, and probably of the planets. This modern expert felt extremely humble and could only pay homage to the high science of our ancestors, although the homage was tinged with fear. "It is quite frightening," he wrote in Scientific American, June, 1959, "to learn that, shortly before their great civilization crumbled, the ancient Greeks had come as close as this to our time, not only in terms of their thinking, but also in their scientific technology." Back to the Mojave Desert mystery, it would seem that, based on the various reports, many of which we will record later on, that the Mojave Desert of Southern California and the deserts of western Nevada may in fact be a secret battleground involving the United States government troops working in alliance with the alien races known as the Nordics. Who are they fighting? Their battle, according to several sources, is against the Greys, which have over the last century, possibly earlier, entrenched themselves below ground in underground bases in the Mojave Desert region and elsewhere. Just as though the United States government is allegedly working with Nordics based at Mount Shasta near Weed, California, and others in nearby star systems such as those mentioned above who have a base below the Panamint Mount Death Valley region. Their Neo-Saurian adversaries are allegedly working with others of their kind within a huge subterranean network centered below the Mount Archuleta region near the town of Dulce in northwestern New Mexico, which seems to be the United States center of activity in regards to MIBs or men in black, abductions, mutilations, disappearances, sightings of reptilian entities and so on. These Greys are allegedly working with other Draconians who have established themselves in Alpha Draconis Epsilon Boot Zeta Reticuli Alterin Aquila Rigil Trax Orion, as well as possibly other nearby star systems. Is this war being carried on in secret? Partly because the United States government does not believe that the American public can handle the truth. Just recall Orson Welles' Ware of the World's radio program of so many years ago, and the panic it incited. In reference to Zeta Reticuli, from where many of the Greys are said to originate, Jeffrey L. Kretsch, in his article The Age of Nearby Stars, which appeared in Astronomy magazine in response to Terence Eckerson's December 1974 article The Zeta Reticuli Incident, describing the Hill abduction, an article which incidentally raised more interest among the readership than any other article the magazine had published, makes note of the metal and carbon deficiencies of this binary system. He suggests that carbon-based life could not have evolved in such an environment, and he may be right, for the Greys have told some abductees that they're actually returning to Earth, their native planet. No doubt they will try to use this argument, even if true, in an attempt to justify their planned takeover of the planet. Recently one researcher, Kansas, was approached by the family of a United States intelligence worker, O.S.I. by the name of Tucker, who had disappeared mysteriously. They were concerned and frightened as they had discovered, in a personal locker of his, several papers describing intimate details of activities surrounding the Dulce, New Mexico and Nevada S4, etc. underground installations. Among this large stack of papers was hidden the following letter, which was stamped secret. The letter, copies of which were apparently also in the hands of a few other researchers as well, stated the following: Dear John, I am writing to you in the event that I do not return. There is a triangle surrounding the Nevada test site. There are in fact two of them. Each one frontiers on the other. One is the electromagnetic triangle, installed by MJ-12. This is a shield to protect the benevolence, very human-looking, from the EBs, so-called extraterrestrial biological entities or Greys, Branton, while they help us develop our counterattacks/defenses. The other is the EBs trap, keeping the benevolence in the redoubt. At each corner of the M triangle you will find BLM stations, and they are the transmitters of the shield. Facing each one of these is an EB transmitter. There are many of these standoffs throughout the world. It is important that you do not interfere by attempting to destroy one of their surrounds. They would be able to double up somewhere else and overthrow that position. Once that link is overthrown, our support team would fail. Their overextension is deliberate on our part. We are like the Chinese. We can't out-technology them, but we can outnumber them. Especially since they can't breed here and it is too far for them to go back home without our help. Many of our triangles are ruses to keep them overextended. They can't get out of our solar system because our electromagnetic field, at this time, Branton, is the wrong frequency for their propulsion system to work efficiently. This explains why the EBs cannot commit more vehicles to our solar system. The humans at the Nevada test site may, in fact, if we are to believe some researchers, be victims of subtle reptilian propaganda and intimidation. For instance, this source apparently believes that all the Saurian Greys or EBs come from extraterrestrial worlds. However, as we've shown, there is much evidence that Saurian activity exists within deep subterranean levels and cavities throughout the Earth, and has so for many centuries. This is a fact that the Saurians have tried to hide from humankind, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial. Also, there are accounts suggesting that the Sauroids, Greys, etc., are in fact breeding profusely and reproducing themselves via deep subterranean polyembryony tanks below Dulce and elsewhere, and are not as overextended as they might have us to believe. However, on the other hand, the fear the humans might have of prematurely attacking the enemy positions might possibly be propaganda intended to keep humans from taking offensive action, believing they are keeping the Greys, etc., at bay when in fact the Greys are attacking offensively human society on other hidden fronts via mass abductions, deception, implantations, psychic manipulation, recruitment of fifth-column humans and infiltration. We personally do not believe in standoffs. In war there is no neutrality. One is either attacking in various ways or being attacked in various ways which those on the defensive might not even be aware of. The letter continued. The headquarters of this particular surround is Deep Springs, California. At this location one can find a school for communist homosexuals who have defected to the EBs in exchange for a cure for AIDS and a promise to their own little world, including reproduction via cloning and artificial wombs. Their sperm fertilize eggs taken from abductees. You will not likely see the hybrids hidden inside the mountain, unless you have starlight binoculars. Some Homosapien-appearing malevolence mercenaries are also there. 9 Soviets were there at the same time Soviets were at the NTS. They were there in the hopes of talking them into defecting back to our side. We are still hopeful. The collaborators use the cover organization Natural Resources Defense Council, with front offices in New York and 1350 New York Avenue, NW, Suite 300, Washington, D.C. 20005, Tel. 202-783-7800. It is headed by Tom Cochran, staffed by Kevin Priestley Unruh, John Brune Unruh, Holly Eisler on San Diego, Gary Reisling University Pasadena, Holly Nelson New York, Mary Manning LV Sun, Ed Vogel LVR, and many others I can reveal later. One will also find that each corner of their triangle is at the base of a mountain. At each location you will find several entrances to underground systems. Do not attempt to enter, unless you wish to become liquid protein. You may however harass the EBs 2 other corners by placing a large magnet on the vaults. Placing a magnet on the other 2 entrances at each location will not affect anything. This temporarily interrupts their communications with Deep Springs until the collaborator team comes out to see what is going on. If you place a large magnet on this entrance, it is a large computer near the surface, you can hear it, it will affect an immediate interruption. So, you can take it off in a short time, 1 hour, and take it with you. They will still have to come and reset the system. If you plant magnets, camouflaged like rocks, around these entrances, the EBs won't come out and the sellouts won't be able to find them. The Ebs are also allergic to high concentrations of sugar. You will find that at 2 locations I have poured sugar around their exits. Always wear magnets near these locations. They interrupt the Ebs' sense of direction due to an internal compass much like those found in migrating birds, similar to our loss of balance when our eardrum is affected. Please wait until I have returned. If you have an airplane, I would like to take aerial photos. We can photograph them together. Our lion's crest, symbolic of the shield, and our sign/mark/graffiti is enclosed. Do not reveal them or else everybody will use them and you won't know the real from the pseudos. You do not know me. I do not know you. This is not for public dissemination. Zealots may disrupt the balance before the Ebb Day. Another researcher by the name or pseudonym of Jason Bishop has revealed that John, to whom the letter was addressed, is none other than John Lear, one of the most decorated test pilots in the United States history, and whose father William Lear founded Learjet Corporation, invented the 8-track tape recorder, and so on, who himself claims many connections with people in the know. According to the letter, both the Nevada test site and Deep Springs are areas of conflict between the United States government, Nordic groups who are at war with the Saurian Greys or the Reptilians, since the internal makeup of the Greys is reportedly reptilian-based rather than mammalian-based. Jason Bishop also released some other information he received by way of John Lear, from this individual whose letter we just quoted. According to Lear, the author of the letter was actually a security officer at the test site who had called into the Billy Goodman talk show, Veg Radio, Las Vegas, Nevada, on a few occasions. This person used the codename, Yellowfruit, which he claimed was actually the codename of a top-secret group that worked at the site, with which he was involved. If also sent Lear a copy of the Benevolent Teachings. The Benevolents are allegedly working at the test site with MJ-12 and are blonde Nordic and Dorarian-like people. It is not certain whether these aliens are tied in with the so-called Exterran Nordic Pleiadians, the Terran Aryan Antarcticans, or the Subterran Blonde Telosians, as all 3 groups allegedly exist according to different sources, and may have been confused with each other in the past. All 3 of these groups allegedly possess aerial discs, although in reality their societies may be somewhat distinct from each other. The Benevolent Teachings, not limited to the below, were identified as follows: discouraged, non-preparatory sports activities that cannot be used in non-sporting life: motocross, auto racing, skateboarding, roller skating, football, baseball, hockey. Also discouraged, processed sugar, recreational carbohydrates, recreational fluids, white bread. Encouraged, non-ceremonial lessons of the major religions and preparatory sports activities that can be used in non-sporting life: swimming, running, hiking, martial arts, survival arts. Teach your children. Forbidden, alcohol, illegal drugs, nicotine, recreational drugs, unjustifiable homicide. Must avoid weakness. Evil grows in weakness. Execute evil prisoners in order to help other prisoners. Editor's note: one personal suggestion would be to place all unreformable death row prisoners together for life, without possibility of parole, in large though sealed single-entrance extreme security closely monitored deep underground prisons with others of their own kind and gender. Provide minimum life provisions and possibly even religious Christian consultation, or broadcasting, and hope at least that the hell that these people make for each other will motivate some of them to seek for a better existence in the afterlife. Branton. Must quarantine contagious disease, AIDS, victims humanely. Show strength. Stop illegal drugs. Stop destruction of environment. Stop pollution. Use nuclear power. Study, Bill of Rights, biology, computers, economics, geography, history, Latin, mathematics, philosophy, survival skills, United States of America's Declaration of Independence, United States of America's Constitution, vocational skills. Yellowfruit also provided coordinates for the electromagnetic triangles he referred to in his letter. These include A, N37, 22, 30, E117, 58, 0. B, N38, 21, 0, E115, 35, 0. C, N35, 39, 0, E114, 51, 0. Also, Yucca Lake, N37, 0, 30, E116, 70. From what we can gather from the letter quoted earlier, there are many areas of conflict or standoff between the humans and Saurians around the world. Those who realize that the conflict exists, such as the inner government, have failed to warn the general population of the problem, possibly out of fear. However, as we have seen, the documentation proving that such a hidden conflict between the human and serpent races has existed since ancient times is surfacing en masse. We must realize, however, that due to the likelihood of the existence of recovered antediluvian technologies, as well as the apparent existence of hidden human and reptilian communities within the Earth, which have utilized and added to such technologies since ancient times, the possibility exists that this war began on the surface of the Earth, spread to the caverns, and was later propelled out into interplanetary and interstellar space. From the depths of the Earth, both races, as these technologies developed, apparently rushed to take control of as much territory as possible before the other side had a chance to. The humans, motivated more by their desire to expand their civilizations for the good of their overall societies, and the reptilians and possibly humans, sellouts, who had collaborated with them, motivated largely through imperialistic tendencies, including the desire to establish godlike control over all creation without regard for universal law, a prime directive, etc. However, we must be reminded that man is partially to blame for opening the door for these intelligent yet corrupted creatures to enter in and invade our societies, as well as possibly opening the way for their parasitical infestation of the heavens. Perhaps the war in heaven between Michael and the dragon, or the old serpent, referred to in Revelation chapter 12, ties in with this scenario as well. Utilizing the ancient technologies and adding upon them through a multiplication process, it is uncertain just which race was first able to land itself upon Luna and other planetary bodies, the humans or the reptilians. But there are indications that they both may have done so at least a few thousand years ago, give or take a millennia. According to John Lear's intelligence sources, the United States astronauts have even been warned of the dangers of space exploration by human UFO occupants who have allegedly monitored and even accompanied many of the space shots, possibly something along the line of similarity to an older brother teaching a younger brother how to ride a bike, although in this case the stakes are much higher. Many of these dangers would no doubt include malevolent alien entities. UFOs have also allegedly followed the United States space shots such as the Apollo and the shuttle flights, the latter of which have actually filmed what appear to be battles between alien craft and Earth-based defense systems. The Apollo shots were allegedly followed from Earth by UFOs, suggesting that an ancient Terran society, which already went through the space race phase, perhaps hundreds or thousands of years ago, was concerned with the feeble efforts of their little brothers to move out into space. As we will see later on in this file, the possibility that an ancient Terran race developed space travel thousands of years ago is one which may be backed up by actual evidence. When we realize that the United States itself became the major world power in less than 200 years, and as we've said had essentially gone from the horse and buggy to interplanetary travel in less than 75 years, then how much activity might have resulted in extraterrestrial realms over a period of 2,000 or 3,000 years by human and saurian beings whose sciences were increasing at a synchronous rate? Also, do the benevolent human aliens allegedly working at the Nevada test site have any connection with the Havmasuvs described earlier? Were the human-occupied bases on Luna as seen by NASA officials, according to George H. Leonard and others, actually installations placed there by the Havmasuvs or another society affiliated with them? These are questions we intend to answer in this file. As we've indicated, there are numerous accounts suggesting that an ancient race who utilize high technology now resides in the bowels of Mount Shasta in the Cascade Range of Northern California. According to researcher William F. Hamilton, who claims to have met representatives of this society, the inhabitants of the subterranean city under Mount Shasta are usually tall, blue-eyed blondes who number in excess of over 1.5 million in their large 5-leveled, 20-mile-long underground city. Mount Shasta has been a major site for UFO contacts for decades. Also Indian legends, as well as stories of strange people being seen on its slopes, abound there. These accounts are so well known that many of the travel guides to the Shasta area mention the legends of the ancient people who are said to dwell within this ancient volcanic peak. Aside from the apparent Greek connection with the underground city allegedly existing beneath Mount Shasta, that is, the name Telos itself, which is a Greek word that literally means uttermost purpose, Mr. Hamilton also states that some of the Telosians claim to be descended from ancient cultures such as the Quetzals and the Nagamayas. This seems to indicate a possible Mesoamerican connection or origin of some of the alleged inhabitants of Shasta. Is it possible that South American cultures and Mediterranean cultures such as the ancient Greeks teamed up in their obsession to explore the heavens? James Churchward, who authored several books describing the history of an alleged sunken island continent which he believed existed within the Indian Ocean and which went by the name of Mu, has indicated that Binaga Mayas were a human tribe tied in with ancient India. Whether the Telosians are descended from ancient Mayapan, India or Greece is not clear. It is possible, as we've said, that many ancient empires, such as was suggested in the Havmasuv account, flowed into each other and traded and interacted with each other to a large degree. Early archaeologist Auguste S. Laplangen, one of the first researchers to do an in-depth study of the Mayan language, came under criticism from orthodox scientists when he claimed to have broken the Mayan language code, and learned of the close connections the Mayas had with Egypt, India and an ancient island continent called Mu. Although Churchward placed Mu in the Indian Ocean, Laplangen placed it somewhere in the Caribbean, perhaps in the Bermuda Triangle region, possibly mistaking it with the antediluvian Atlantis legends. Others, however, place Mu or Elam Mu off the west coast of North America or, in fact, identify modern-day California as none other than the ancient kingdom of Mu, which in ancient times was a peninsula or a large island just of the California coast, as the Havmasuv account seems to suggest. It is also possible that the Murians had several colonies throughout the ancient world. Zechariah Sitchin, author of many books, states that some Mayas may originally have came from Egypt. This might be the case when we realize the apparent similarities between the Egyptians and Mayas as they can be seen in the Mayan and Egyptian pyramids, and so on. Another possibility is one suggested by Churchward, that the Mayas or Naga Mayas came from India. However, even if they came from Egypt, a connection to India may still exist, for the ancient Greek writer Philostratus insists that the first Egyptians were originally navigators from India. Whether or not the Mayas were originally descended from the Egyptians or ancient East Indians, there is much evidence that the Mayas were nevertheless a highly scientific society, who were well advanced in medicine, astronomy, architecture and mathematics. In fact, Charles Berlitz, author of many books on the Bermuda Triangle, the Philadelphia Experiment, and other mysteries, refers to the account of a Colorado art historian by the name of Jose Argales. Argales claimed to have met an old Mayan sage by the name of Humberti Men, who told him that his people, the Mayas, still exist as a civilization underground. Brenton, and that they have in the last millennia succeeded in navigating at least 7 nearby planetary systems through advanced spot-faring technologies. In relation to this, a man by the name of Morris Darrell, also of Colorado, a state which is or was believed to be the home of an advanced subterranean human culture, runs an organization called the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Darrell claims to have visited a few of the ancient underground cities and alleges that several members of his organization are Guatemalan Indians of Mayan descent who have told him of their own knowledge of subterranean cities inhabited by both good and evil reptilian beings. It is true that there are many strange caverns in the regions of Yucatan and Guatemala. Eastern Guatemala has Silpino Cave, which has allegedly been explored for months in the direction of ancient volcanic cones without the daring Spilonauts ever finding an end to the labyrinth. While the Lolton Caves, click image right, of Yucatan have an even more interesting history, being surrounded with accounts of ancient treasure troves, endless passages, encounters with people within its depths who claim to be centuries old, and even stories of lost tribes who vanished into the depths while fleeing their enemies, never to be seen again. Now back to the subject of the Havmasuvs and the mysterious Mojave and Death Valley region. In addition to all of the above, there's much evidence that thousands of years ago the Nordic Vikings landed on the west coast of the Americas. However, whether they have anything at all to add to this scenario is uncertain. The best possible source, however, for the Havmasuvs and in fact the Telosians themselves seems to be the ancient Greeks and Mayas, Greco-Mayans. Although, as we've indicated, possibly several ancient societies may have been working together. It is said by some that the Greeks borrowed much of their scientific thought from India during the time of Alexander the Great, and subsequently may have put this scientific thought into physical applications, which were in turn shared with some of the leaders of India. As we will see later on, the ancient Greeks and Aryan East Indians may have been collaborating thousands of years ago in a space race, which propelled these cultures outwards to nearby star systems, possibly a millennia or more before the appearance of Christ. In 1961, Search magazine published a letter in its October issue, pages 76-81, from Eugene A. Statler of, at the time, North Street, Jackson, Missouri. Excerpts from this letter are given here. Dear Mr. Palmer, A few days ago I wrote you a letter in which I brought to your attention an item which was placed by you in the classified advertisement section of the December 1959 issue of Search magazine. In this ad, you requested any information as to the whereabouts of L. Taylor Hanson, who had disappeared 12 years prior to that issue, and he was quoted as saying that he had discovered a black, polished shaft, leading down into the earth near Death Valley. You will remember that I mentioned that it was strange to have the poem, The Curse of Tippecanoe, listed as written by Hanson if the author had been missing for 14 years. Well, my face is really red. While looking over some of the newest Search and Flying Saucer magazines, I found that no less than 5 articles in the past 3 issues of your magazines have been written by Mr. Hanson. Therefore, I can safely assume that Mr. Hanson is not missing. Please accept my apologies for my rash statements. I'll try to be a little more comprehensive in my investigations the next time I try to make an earth-shaking announcement. However, my one suggestion still stands. Why not inform everyone, if you have not already done so, as to the whole story behind Hanson's disappearance and his discovery? What was his polished, black shaft? Ray Palmer's editorial reply to Statler's letter was as follows. It is true that we searched for Mr. Hanson for all those years, and when we found him, he had this cryptic remark to make concerning his whereabouts: it would be best just to drop the subject. However, we do have Mr. Hanson back doing articles for us, and not only that, but we have 1 book manuscript in production, 1 on Atlantis, and 1 on Lemuria. We feel sure that these will be quite sensational, and it may be they will answer a lot of unanswered questions concerning Mr. Hanson and his mysterious 12-year silence. As we have seen by the Havasuvan-related accounts, hidden technological societies descended from ancient Grecia or other ancient societies may very well have established aerospace travel several hundred, if not a few thousand, years ago. Assuming this, once aerial travel was accomplished by ancient races such as those described by Auger Make, William Hamilton and others, space travel would be the next logical step. There are indications that the Havasuvs may have been only one of many ancient Terran groups to discover free energy, electromagnetic propulsion, and they certainly have not been the last. The problem is, when a segment of the human race, a scientific cabal for instance, stumbles upon the secret of electromagnetic propulsion or even atomic, mercury, ion or tachyon energy drives, tachyons being an actual faster-than-light particle recognized by quantum physicists, they have a propensity to seclude themselves from mainstream humanity. This was usually done, according to various accounts, out of a fear that their technologies would be stolen and used for destructive purposes. It has only been in recent centuries that this techno-imperialism on the part of the secret scientific fraternities has weakened, as the overall masses of humanity have demanded their share of the technological pie, and with it they have also received the darker side of technology, machine guns, missiles, atomic weapons, the works. Usually man has a suspicious outlook toward his fellow man, understandably, and this has apparently led many such subterranean cultures to develop their technologies in secret. Some hidden societies such as the MIB or Men in Black have been especially defensive of intrusion and have used a type of psychological terrorism in order to keep their secrets hidden from those on the surface, especially now that the technologies of the international societies are becoming more refined. This defensiveness and paranoia on the part of the MIB might be explained by their own guiltiness, which stems from their ancient associations with the serpent races, and the subsequent mental control which the reptilians have established throughout their own and other collaborative societies. Many of the MIB, however, are prisoners of environmental influence and cannot be condemned for being born into such a society. We refer here to the humanoid MIB, although androidal and even reptilian men in black have also been encountered. There is no telling how many times such a scenario of a society discovering the utilization of electromagnetic energy and subsequently disconnecting themselves from mainstream society has run its course throughout the millennia. As for the Men in Black, which according to researchers like John Keel are an Illuminati-like secret society who may be collaborating with the malevolent reptilians, their black automobiles have been seen entering and leaving underground areas. Like for instance, according to one witness, a particular mountain near a road that runs between Hopeland and Lakeport, California, a road on which many automobiles including government vehicles have allegedly disappeared throughout the years. The Haitians refer to these large black automobiles, which have sometimes been seen, apparently operating without a visible driver, as the Zobobs. The superstitious Haitians, many of whom are into voodoo and serpent worship themselves, refer to the Zobobs as a race of sorcerers, and add that if one sees one of these large black automobiles apparently operating without a driver, that they had better leave it alone. As we have suggested, there are also many cases which suggest that many of the so-called men in black are not human at all. But whether good or evil, there are apparently numerous societies, many of them highly advanced technologically and many of them very ancient, who have hidden themselves away from mainstream surface societies, again for either benevolent or malevolent reasons. There is, in fact, evidence that such high-tech ancient cultures did exist in ancient times. Ivno, in his book UFOs and Extraterrestrials in History, records actual accounts of ancient metallurgy factories, as well as documented evidence that the ancients were very familiar with atomic sciences. He states that the manufacture of metal objects, a very advanced form of metallurgy, would be necessary in the construction of machines or aerospace craft. Branton presupposes the existence of appropriate factories. In spite of the fact that the modern mind draws back from this conclusion, we are forced to accept the evidence. Dr. Kuryun Magarachian brought to light a foundry where the ancients worked copper, lead, zinc, manganese, steel, etc. Scientists who were doubtful of the existence of blast furnaces now have material proof. 25 of these constructions have been discovered, but it is calculated that there must have been at least 200. These ancient scientists, as we've indicated, also seem to have made persistent efforts to hide their knowledge from irresponsible persons, although some of this ancient knowledge apparently did fall into the wrong hands, if certain accounts of ancient nuclear explosions are to be believed. Ivno reveals, we again encounter traces of the antique atomic sciences in India. The Brahmin treatises Vaisesika, the sacred book Yoga Vasishta, all speak of the structure of matter. There are vast worlds within the voids of each atom, as diversified as dust in the rays of sunlight. Being wiser than we are, and aware of the danger that atomic force represented, the ancients divulged none of the secrets of that science to the profane, in order that the atom would not be used for destructive ends. It would be the greatest of sins, a Chinese wrote, 1,000 years or more ago, to disclose the secret of our art to soldiers. Antique people knew about the atom, but were they capable of producing an atomic explosion? Scientists spent a long time wondering about this question until the discovery of the Dronaparva, a Hindu text which recounts the explosion of an atomic bomb, a flaring projectile with the brilliance of a flame without smoke, was launched. A great darkness suddenly obscured the skies. Clouds thundered in the uppermost air, releasing a downpour of blood. Burned by the heat of this arm, the world appeared shaken by fever. The physicist, Frederick Soddy, asks, in these old tales, can we see some justification of the belief that prior representatives of a forgotten race of men not only achieved the level of knowledge that we have so recently attained, but even a power that we do not yet have? Indeed, traces of artificial radioactivity have been detected in various parts of the world in the course of diggings into antique sites. In India, a skeleton was exhumed which revealed a powerful intensity of radioactivity. This would tend to confirm the theory of atomic explosions in prehistory. Mr. No concludes. Daniel Cohen, in his book The Ancient Visitors, Doubleday and Company Incorporated, New York, 1976, also relates an account taken from an ancient text concerning what might have been aerial craft developed by an old race. A number of ancient epics from India contain descriptions of fiery flying chariots. There are lines like this one, Bhima flew with his Vimana on an enormous ray which was brilliant as the sun and made a noise like the thunder of a storm. Ivno related still other accounts suggesting that ancient Terrans did in fact attempt space travel. Successfully, a Chinese on the moon 4,300 years before the Russians and the Americans, the ancient people, making use of their astronomical knowledge, may have been able to launch out into the exploration of space. The way was long, and as if enveloped in darkness, explains Chu Yan, a Chinese poet of the 3rd century before Christ. Chinese tradition narrates the extraordinary adventure of Hu Yi, an engineer of the Emperor Yao, who decided, 4,300 years ago, to go to the moon with a celestial bird. In the course of the flight, the bird indicated to the traveler the exact movements of the rising, the apogee, and the setting of the sun. Hu Yi thereafter explained that he sailed up the current of luminous air. Could this current have been the exhaust of a rocket? Single quote: "He no longer perceived the rotary movement of the sun," the narrator points out. Effectively, contemporary astronauts have noted that, in space, it was not possible to discern the diurnal passage of the sun. And what did the Chinese engineer observe on the moon? He saw an horizon which appeared frozen. To protect himself from the glacial air, He built the palace at the Great Cold. His wife, Cheng Go, left to join him on the satellite, which she described as a luminous sphere, brilliant as glass, of an enormous size, and very cold. If one such flight to the moon was successful, then we must assume that many others followed. Actually, Evenou quotes another ancient legend from China which suggests that at one point a great space race to explore and colonize nearby planets was a reality, and that as a result of a perverted race of troglodytes the world was thrown into a dark ages which led to an almost complete loss of contact and communication between the other planetary colonists and the ancient world. Quoting from the legend, the Maotzi were a perverted race which had taken refuge in the caverns. It is said that their descendants still live in the outlying areas of Canton. Then, under the influence of Chuyeo, they stirred up trouble throughout the world, and it became written with highwaymen. The Lord Chantai, a king of the so-called divine dynasty, saw that the people had lost every vestige of virtue. And so he ordered Chang and Li to cut all communication between heaven and earth. From that time on there was no more going up nor coming down. In connection to the above, it may not be any coincidence that John A. Keel states on pages 93-94 of his book The Muffman Prophecies, Signet Books, New York, 1975 paperback edition, the following concerning certain UFO witnesses. In some cases, ancient lettering like Greek or Chinese appears on the object. The effect is the same. Months, even years, later the same percipient may again see the same numbers or letters on an object. From the ancient text, the Brihat Kata, we read how the ancient inhabitants of India were aware of the flying craft which had been developed by certain Greeks who were very possessive of their scientific and mechanical knowledge. In the ancient account we read, Padmavat explains that Queen Vasavadota wishes to fly in a chariot to visit the other parts of earth. Vasantak, the master of entertainment, broke into a laugh and told her, the women servants of the king have exactly that same desire. I have told them to suspend a swing between two high poles and to use this to go to and fro in the air. And if the queen wishes these aerial voyages, then she must content herself in the same fashion. Everybody started to laugh, but Rumanavdat cut in. That is quite enough joking, he said. No, let us look at the facts. We are talking in the void. Young Gendarayam interrupted. That is a problem for the artisans. Rumanavdat convoked the carpenters and gave them strict injunction to build a flying machine at once. The corps of artisans joined together and after a long period of shuffling about and an effort to avoid the whole problem, they finally sent their delegators, trembling in fear, to find Rumanavdat. We know of 4 sorts of machines, they told him, those made of water, those made of air, those made of dust, and those composed of a great many pieces. But as far as flying machines are concerned, we have never even seen one. The Yavanas, Greeks, are the ones who know about them. Then a Brahmin spoke of a carpenter, Pukrasaka, whom the king had told of the existence of a certain Vigvita, who was mounted upon a mechanical cock. The foreign ambassadors whispered, we should never reveal the secret of the flying machines to anyone whomsoever, be he artisan or other. It is too difficult to understand for one who is not Greek. All of a sudden, a stranger, a Greek, appeared. He called upon Rumanavdat to supply him with necessary material, and he built a flying chariot in the form of Garuda, the eagle with a human body, the steed of Vishnu. It was ornamented with flowers. The queen and her husband flew around the world and then returned to their city. This account, as we can see, indicates that the ancient East Indians and Greeks were allies and were working together in the development of aerial craft. Could this explain the apparent involvement of Neo-Grecian, and possibly Indian and Mayan cultures in connection with the human civilizations living in the various cavern systems beneath California? There are other indications besides those that we've just mentioned which suggest that the ancient Greeks were very steeped in the intellectual sciences and used this knowledge to explore the unknown regions. Is it possible that before the Grecian Empire crumbled, certain members of that society continued to carry on their own version of their civilization in remote outposts beneath or beyond the earth? According to Judeo-Christian history and prophecy, Book of Daniel, 4 world empires would run their course before the Messiah himself finally reigned as king of an incorruptible kingdom. The first was the Babylonian Empire, second was the Medo-Persian Empire, followed by the Grecian Empire, which would subdue the face of the whole earth. See Daniel 8, 5-1. The last empire would be the largest, cruelest and most oppressive, the Roman Empire. It would rise and rule the nations, and then fall in a sense, although still retain considerable control over the religious world. Revelation ch. 17-18, and then revive into a single ten-horned empire ruled by a counterfeit Messiah. The idea that the Grecian Empire went about on the face of the whole earth might be significant if we consider that the Havmasuvs, for instance, were connected with ancient Grecia. As for the highly intellectual nature of the Greeks, this was confirmed by the Apostle Paul, who alleged that during his visit to Athens, Greece, the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else, but either to tell, or to hear some new thing. Acts 17:21. Actually, when we consider the possibility that an ancient Grecian-like race developed aerospace travel thousands of years ago and compare this with modern accounts of human aphonauts, there are indications that a connection between the two may be found. Many modern historians attribute our present sciences to the ancient Greek philosophers. However, when the Dark Ages of Roman Inquisition came, these sciences were suppressed. But what if, as some suggest, certain of the early Greek philosophical fraternal scientific societies discovered for themselves hidden abodes far from the oppression of mainstream society and continued to develop their sciences with the freedom and creativity that only such hidden colonies could provide? One very interesting account, which seems to indicate that high-tech human societies on and within the Earth did in fact colonize other planetary bodies thousands of years ago, appeared in Search magazine. The article, titled "Brace Yourselves," was written by an ex-NASA employee who identified himself only as the Doc. His account appeared in the winter, 1988-89 issue of that magazine. This ex-NASA employee related at the beginning of the article two very remarkable things that he'd heard while working at NASA. One of them included the discovery that the Sun's surface may not be a region of continuous thermonuclear activity as has commonly been believed. Instead, scientists had found that it appeared to be in essence a tremendous electromagnetic dynamo or sphere, which in turn generates the electromagnetic fields of the planets. In other words, it seemed to be more of a gigantic electrical light or sphere than a gigantic thermonuclear reactor, although nuclear reactions might play a part, but not nearly to the extent that many believe. Some have alleged that the heat experienced from the solar orb on a planet's surfaces is not so much determined by their proximity to the sun, but more by the amount and type of atmosphere with which the solar radiations and rays interact to produce friction and heat. In simple terms, the sun is not hot in the sense that most believe, but the solar flares and explosions taking place on the surface of the sun are more consistent with tremendous electrical arcs than with nuclear explosions. The other revelation he received from other NASA employees was that the United States Navy has for several years been making regular reconnaissance observation trips to monitor alien bubble cities on the ocean floor. Some years afterwards, while practicing homeopathic medicine in Phoenix, Arizona in 1984, the doc met a young man who had come into his office to pick up some UFO photos he had loaned to a different doctor on the previous visit. The ex-NASA employee struck up a conversation with the young man. Following is an excerpt from the conversation which ensued between the young man and the doc during that visit. The young man said, after talking to the doc about the photos, "So, do you know anything about UFOs?" "Only what I've read since the 1950s and hear tell by others who have had encounters." "How about yourself?" "Well, there are such craft now in our atmosphere with bases underground and underwater. One group is very advanced and can take you anywhere in the universe." Should Einstein be upset to hear that? I thought about it for a while. There is a whole science concerning traveling above the speed of light. These people are so advanced that most of the world is not ready to understand or appreciate their values and their scientific attainment. Well, no matter how advanced their technology, spiritually they have the same plight as we. We are all spiritual brothers and sisters and must solve the mystery of returning to our source. He looked at me penetratingly and continued. When I was 8 years old and playing with a friend out in a field, a craft came down, landed not far from us, and a man and woman came out and walked up to us, smiling and calling us by name. They seemed to know all about me, what school I was going to, what subjects I liked best, and they told me that they would every so many years return and visit with me. They also said that they wanted me to do well in school. Did they return? I asked, smiling, half in disbelief. Yes, surprisingly, they did. About 5 years later, I was about 13 or 14. They told me that I was one of them and I was put on this planet to help them someday in the future. Incredible. I played along with this. You haven't heard the best part. I was 19 and was driving one night up through a wooded area in Connecticut, and suddenly this saucer swooped down over my car. I almost drove off the highway. I was so shocked. It paced me, staying just above the car, and this voice came over my car radio speakers, but my radio wasn't even on. This voice knew my name and asked a number of times, "Dave," pseudonym, "when will you return home? You have been gone so long." I was really shaken up by this, and then they somehow lifted my car off the highway and took me over a hill and brought me back down on the same highway, without my tires even squealing. They finally said that they would return again someday. I stopped at the first public phone and phoned my parents in Vermont. When my mother answered, I was so shaken and anxious over the possibility of my parents having not told me the truth, I didn't bother to tell her what had happened on the highway. "Mom, who am I?" "Dave, you're my son." "Mother, who am I really? How did I get into this world?" "Son, you got into this world just like other boys. I delivered you in a hospital." "Mom, I don't believe it. Over and over I have been visited by people in starships who, somehow, know me. They say I am supposed to help them someday. Their ship just came down over my car, they called me by name and toyed with me about when I would come home to them someday. And then they picked up my car off the highway and gave me quite a shocker of a ride. I'm different, aren't I? I want to hear the truth." There was a long silence at the other end of the phone. "All right. We were going to tell you someday, as you have continued to mention these kind of things. Your father and I found you and your sister one evening as we were walking out behind the cabin like we did every evening after dinner. We found you and your sister wrapped in a blanket nestled between some boulders up on the hillside. We couldn't believe what we saw. You both were dressed in shiny one-piece suits. You were about a year old. We asked around and could not find anyone that might know your parents. We figured that you had been abandoned, but we both had the strongest impulse to take care of you both until someone came into town and asked about you." I was now shaking my head. "And have you continued to be visited by your friends?" "Yes. More frequently, like a calendar." "Where are they from?" He had me going now. "Are you familiar with the Seven Sisters constellation?" "I don't think so. It's also called the Pleiades constellation." "Why are they, you hear? They won't interfere for the most part with the social problems and destiny of the Earth. It's a policy of theirs." I was standing up now, looking sad. "I'm sorry to hear that." The doc then gave him a checkup, since the young man had originally come in for back problems. After he had informed the doctor that his back no longer bothered him, he told the doc that he had to rush to catch a flight to Switzerland, and left the clinic. As I was turning into my office, the doc continued, "One of the chiropractic physicians called as he was walking towards me down the hall carrying an X-ray. Look at this X-ray. This guy is really different." I looked at it. 2 extracervical vertebrae. Also abnormally low vital signs, blood pressure, pulse. Not sure about the placement of the organs either. I looked at the helpless expression on my associate's face. "Friend of yours? The guy that just left to catch a flight to Switzerland?" I found myself looking down an empty hallway, far off into the distance. In his book, Light Years, Morgan Antican Books. Atlantic Monthly Press. New York, 1987, Gary Kinder reveals that the Swiss contactee Edward "Billy" Meyer was told by the star travelers he allegedly encountered that they were from the Pleiades, some 430 light-years from Earth. The Pleiades are a relatively nearby, open star cluster consisting of hundreds of stars, and according to scientists the Sun, or Sol, itself and some of its neighbors revolve around Alcyon, the central star of the Pleiades cluster. However, the Pleiades are a relatively young system of stars which are unlikely to have developed life of their own, and, in fact, the Pleiadians claim that they are not native to that part of the galaxy. The Pleiadians claim to have terraformed certain planets in that sector to support life, and that their actual place of origin is much closer to Earth, in the Lyra systems, some 30 or so light-years from our solar system. In other words, they migrated outwards from the general direction of the Earth. The Pleiadians, according to Meyer, look remarkably, almost exactly, like us, although many of them are allegedly Nordic appearing, some with blonde hair and others with darker shades. They number only a little more than 500 million on their terraformed planet of Era, in the Taygeta system of the Pleiades. This suggests that they have probably been living on that planet for a relatively short period of time as compared with the inhabitants of the Earth, who number over 7 billion. They also claim to have horses, cows, rabbits, fish, and other Terran life forms roaming about on their planet. This strongly suggests that the ancestor age of the Lyran Pleiadians and those on Earth are intimately linked via ancient civilization, and in fact Meyer was told that their ancient lineage does in fact converge with that of Earth's ancient inhabitants. When we consider that the Pleiadians originally came from Lyra, which is much closer to planet Earth, and consider the remarkable similarities between Terran and Lyran Pleiadian life, then one might wonder if Lyra itself might have been originally colonized by ancient explorers such as the Havmasuvs, or by other civilizations such as the Mayas, Greeks, Chinese or East Indians, who according to many sources all possessed aerial and or interplanetary exploratory craft a few thousand years ago. There is incidentally another group of extraterrestrials who have made themselves known to various contactees and who claim to be tied in with the Pleiadians in ancient Earth, suggesting an even greater possibility that these as well as the Pleiadians had their genesis originally on ancient Earth thousands of years ago. Could planet Earth be the original seed from which all sentient life in the universe proceeded? To be honest, there have been many claims, mostly through so-called channeled information, which would have us to believe that the Earth was originally colonized by beings from other worlds. We are of the opposite opinion, however, and suggest that much of the inhabited sectors of this galaxy were colonized by the many expeditions which, unofficial history tells us, were sent outward from Earth by several hidden societies who had attained the ability to initiate interplanetary or interstellar travel throughout the past 3,000 or 4,000 years, in postdiluvian times. The other side in this argument may present all the evidence they can gather to support their theory, however they must allow us the same privilege. We feel that if we are to suggest that planet Earth was the original life seed of the galaxy, then we have the duty to compile the evidence to support this theory. So most if not all of the information contained in these files is information which we have gathered in support of the above thesis, and we make no apologies. We present this possibility not because of any egotistical desire to place planet Earth above any other world, but simply because it seems to be the one explanation which fits with all of the accounts given in this file. This other spacefaring group who are allegedly tied in with the Pleiadians claim to come from the Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridanus star systems, which are two of the nearest Sol-type star systems in this sector of the galaxy. According to Meyer, a great interplanetary battle and mass human exodus took place ages ago within the Lyran system, and as a result a large percent of the human inhabitants were forced to evacuate their planet within that system after many of their ancestors were apparently killed in the war. Meyer was not told, to our knowledge, just who the attackers were, but another contactee claims that the attackers in the Lyran Wars were none other than the interstellar parasites known to us as the Greys. Some who have been abducted against their will by the Greys have even been shown holographic recordings of such an interplanetary war, as if the Greys in their Leviathan pride were parading their supposed invincibility to their frightened and confused abductees. As a result of this war, according to Meyer, a leader by the name of Pleiari allegedly led a mass exodus of surviving refugees from the Lyran system in an effort to reach and colonize the Pleiades, the Hyades and Vega. Even today, as we've seen previously, some contactees have reportedly encountered the modern-day Vegans, as well as the Pleiadians. Whether Tau Ceti was colonized as a result of this exodus, or whether it was an original link in an apparent colonization by ancient Earthians of the Lyran system, is uncertain. It is interesting however that, when viewed from Earth, the three constellations of Taurus, Pleiades, Cetus, and Eridanus are adjacent to each other. Click image left and in the same sector of the sky. At this point in time, Meyer was told, the Pleiadians were part of a union of interstellar colonists and civilizations numbering over 127 billion humans. One interesting thing that Meyer was told is that the Nordics, or Pleiadians, were approximately 3,000 years advanced over us in technological development. This extreme closeness in development when compared to the multi-billion-year history of the galaxy may seem highly unusual, as well as the fact that nearly all human cultures in this sector of the universe who have contacted Earthians claim to be no more than a few thousand years advanced over us. The most likely explanation is that human life in this part of the galaxy appeared on one single world and quickly spread out to other systems, adapting themselves to their new environments, especially after hyperspace travel became a reality. Are there any other accounts that might support the above scenario? In the spring 1991 issue of UFO Journal of Facts, Box 17206, Tucson, Arizona 85710, researcher Forrest Crawford gives a very remarkable description of a crash recovery of a disk which was reported by a former deep-level government employee who Crawford refers to only as Oscar. For reasons which should be obvious, Oscar's single quote last name was not given. His story, as quoted by Crawford, is as follows. The eggs had their typical lack of firmness and the sausage tasted more like greasy rope than pork links. The order to mobilize saved me from this breakfast experiment. We proceeded down 6 flights of stairs below the Contra Pac submarine base in San Diego to shoot the tubes. After placing a few pieces of jewelry in a container, I climbed into the cylinder to travel the tunnels to an unknown assignment. I wondered what was so important to upgrade our pay from E3 to E6 before we left, and besides that, we could not even finish breakfast. As I am told of our departure, a familiar uneasy feeling comes over me. When you push down on the accelerator in your car, one can feel the tug of inertia sinking you into the seat. When you travel the tubes there is no feeling of motion, but you know when the door opens you will be in another place hundreds, even thousands of miles away. For some comfort I checked to see if the watch hidden in my pocket was still there. I quickly looked to see if it is still running. It seems to be working normally, so why no jewelry? Because of electrical charge built up perhaps? The soft clang of the door opening made me tense again. I did not even feel a stop. Peeking at the watch I noted only 30 minutes had passed. We must be in California, Nevada or Arizona, I thought. As I stepped from the windowless capsule I heard a military policeman murmur, "Turner's Rangers." Our reputation had preceded us. As I readorned my jewelry the first surprise of this assignment was about to come. A high-ranking naval O.S. officer informs us that we will not be allowed above ground while in North Dakota. North Dakota. Several of us were led to a large hangar-like room that had been quickly set up to function as a laboratory. Resting on heavy jackstands in the middle of the room was a large disc-shaped craft. The chief scientist present was introduced as Professor Baer. As his briefing and some discussion proceeded, I rapidly developed rapport with this talented, open-minded and gentle man. The craft had crashed near Phoenix, Arizona and was moved to this North Dakota base. 2 dead alien bodies with fatal radiation exposure were found outside the craft. I reflected on my O.S. training for crash retrieval and remembered thinking, we will never get a chance to be involved in anything that exciting. Well, not only was I involved, I was the security team leader. This meant that when the craft was opened I would be the first one inside. After all, one does not send in a high-ranking officer or a chief scientist to possibly encounter an alien booby trap or extraterrestrial virus. Come to think of it, the prospects did not excite me either. As Professor Baer prepared his ultrasonic sound generators for opening the craft, my apprehension turned to intensity. After all, this was what my training was for. As the Baer tuned his equipment, the smooth solid metal surface of the craft began to ripple like when you throw a stone in the water. When the ripples seemed to gain harmonic stability, the now liquid metal parted in a circular iris-like fashion. As I stepped inside I noticed a fresh pine's end and a strange smoothness to everything. The interior was rounded off and continued with no seams or rivets. It was as if the walls, floor and ceiling were formed out of one piece of metal. Even a table in the center of the craft looked as though it had been pushed up out of the floor. What appeared to be control panels had no knobs, switches or dials. There were strange symbols highlighting these futuristic yet simple consoles. The outside of the craft had no apparent damage, yet the interior showed some distortion, possibly from the crash. Next to one of the panels I could see something that would challenge my training and change my perceptions of reality forever. The craft was just another piece of hardware, but seated next to the panel was a human. Its gender was obviously male. Aside from his unusual dress, he could have walked past you at a grocery store and not command much attention. Upon noticing some injuries about his head, I instinctively and quickly moved toward him to help. His skin was a bronze color, reminiscent of Mediterranean or South American cultures. His hair was similarly brown and very short in a Roman or Crew-style cut. The only real difference in appearance from Earth humans were that his ears were slightly pointed. He reminded me of pictures of Quetzalcoatl, the deity of the ancient Toltecs. Note, this mythic being, which was also known as the feathered serpent, may have been either human or serpentine, depending on the different depictions given by the ancient Mayas, Toltecs, etc. Branton. Single quote, he was conscious and in great pain. One leg was partially pinned by the shifting interior. I was examining cuts on his cheek and lip when I first touched him. An overwhelming feeling of compassion came over me as I heard his voice in my head. I could understand him clearly even though his mouth did not move. The communication was strictly telepathic. Note, in this case he mean empathic. There is little evidence that actual mind-to-mind thought reading is a reality, at least without the aid of sophisticated technology. Even if it were possible, the words formed in the mind of the human encountered by Oscar would most likely be in a language completely unfamiliar to him. Most people who experience this phenomena claim that thought words are not involved, but that so-called telepathy instead involves the empathic feelings or images behind these words. Emotions are the most common universal language between the various different human races, wherever they may be. Many experts claim that words make up only about 20% of the actual communication which passes between people. Sometimes body language, facial expressions, feelings, eye contact, and attitudes tell more about what a person is thinking than mere words can. This is because humans have a dual physical and spiritual nature. Just as an astronomer can determine the chemical makeup of a star by looking at its spectrograph, human beings are like lights in themselves who can to a large extent be interpreted by others who are sensitive to the feelings, expressions in words, attitudes which they are projecting. For instance, emotions, sight, and even thoughts result from a combination of the physical and spiritual natures of human beings. So with this interjection, we now continue with Oscar's single quote account. I perceived his fear of being harmed and told him that I would not let anyone hurt him. Suddenly, a voice from the doorway refocused my attention on the duties at hand. I called back that we had a live one. The craft filled with gloved and masked medical personnel to help free the occupant. He was quickly carried outside and placed on a gurney. I remarked that he felt heavy for his size, and a few others that had assisted agreed. As the alien was whisked off for medical attention, Professor Bear examined the inside of the craft. He found what he thought was a star map depicting the constellation Eridanus and wondered if that might be where the alien was from. After a brief discussion concerning the nature of the communications, Bear asked me to accompany him to the medical lab. As we talked along the way, I referred to the alien being as Hank. The professor asked if that was the name the alien had given me. I explained that it was not and that I had chosen that nickname based on its Native American reference to a troubled spirit. The professor smiled and said, "Hank it is," and the name seemed to immediately stick. In the antiseptic, impersonal medical room, Hank's discomfort was compounded by his complete undressing. While still in great pain, he was examined from head to toe. No stone was left unturned, so to speak. They treated him as if he were a baby of some rare animal species being first born into captivity. It became evident that Hank could not communicate with everyone involved, so I was asked to be translator. I had no trouble understanding that the normal anesthetics we were administering had little or no effect. Suddenly, with Hank's discomfort still a concern, everyone's attention became divided between the being and a new person arriving on the scene. This new person was obviously important, yet seemed to make everyone uneasy. Even Hank recoiled in fear when he came close. He barked a few stern orders and several people, myself included, marched into a nearby conference room. The man introduced himself as Frank Drake and told us he was the head of the operation. The reports would henceforth be titled Project Ozma with an S. As the sound of his continued briefing faded into a daydream, I thought about how my regimented life had just jumped track and was now speeding off in a totally new direction. Forrest Crawford, commenting on the incident, states, "This extraordinary story, according to the witness, is not fiction. Oscar is a simple country person from rural Missouri where he lives with his wife, 3 children, and a menagerie of stray animals. His life is seemingly uncomplicated and unhurried. However, his eyes reflect a clarity indicative of inner knowledge and understanding. We first came to meet this man as the result of a lead from nuclear physicist and renowned ufologist, Stanton Friedman. At the Show Me UFO Conference 1989 single quote in St. Louis, Friedman asked Bruce Wideman, state director of Missouri Muffin, if he would attempt to locate a witness that called responding to the Unsolved Mysteries show on the Roswell crash. The person in question had possibly been involved in a crash retrieval while in the military. The tip had come from a former neighbor of Oscar's. Wideman of course agreed to follow up since Friedman felt that the witness did not have a phone. So with little else than a name, town, and rumor to go on, the search began. Wideman and Alex Horvat, public information officer for Missouri Muffin, arrived in the small town near St. Louis after dark. After questioning a girl at a local convenience mart, no further leads were found. Horvat suggested checking the local bar. This produced a description of a front yard that might be that of the elusive witness. After driving up and down the lane several times, one yard seemed more appropriate than the others, so they hesitantly stopped. Stepping from the car into the country night proved harrowing enough as several large dogs snarled and barked from the surrounding darkness. Whitman was further unnerved when a large black dog began licking his hand as he knocked on the door. Not knowing whether he was being greeted or tasted by the animal, Whitman was relieved to see someone answer. After a brief explanation of what our investigations were, an invitation to sit and talk came as a positive sign. The stranger said he did not know where Bill, the name given Friedman, was, but that he was his brother. After Whitman and Horvath explained their purpose and some of their feelings and ideas, he finally conceded that he was in fact the man they were looking for. He explained that his real name was Oscar and that the name Bill had been given so he would know where any inquiries were coming from. As Oscar told the story that began this article, it became obvious that, because of his military background, the name given was for his protection. The account unfolded further to reveal horrible injustices to Hank and to Oscar himself. At the direction of Drake, the team conducted medical experiments such as spinal taps, marrow sampling, taking organ specimens, and other exploratory surgery on Hank without anesthesia. Oscar had spent many hours over 3 months communicating with and growing close to the alien. One day he stepped between Drake and Hank with his .45 cal pistol drawn and demanded an end to the torture. Drake withdrew, but the next morning Oscar had new orders to depart immediately for St. Albans Hospital in Radford, Virginia, where he was incarcerated for debriefing. He remained isolated for several months until the efforts of Lieutenant Charles Turner, Oscar's commanding officer, got him to move to a psychiatric ward. His family, who had now been out of touch with him for almost 3 months, was told that Oscar had suffered a head injury during a submarine accident. After spending time under psychiatric care, which would damage his military record, he was oddly enough given an honorable discharge. After having returned to civilian life, he and his father embarked on a hiking trip to North Dakota. They purposely entered the restricted area surrounding the base where Oscar had been stationed. Perimeter Patrol picked them up for removal from the area. While in their company, Oscar asked how Hank was doing. One of the guards confided that the alien had died several months earlier. The next trip out to the country included myself and David Rapp, a physicist with 13 years' experience in the aerospace industry and also director of investigations for Missouri Muffin. Because of our backgrounds in science, the discussion focused on technical questions about Oscar's experiences. As for the alleged home of Hank's single-quote people, Crawford states, the pattern from the panel inside the ship was confirmed by Rapp to match stars of the constellation Eridanus as seen from Earth. It was later confirmed by Hank that the stars of origin of his people were Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. In later sessions, Oscar discussed some reasons for the presence of the aliens. He said they do not like the situation with some of the small gray aliens, emphasis ours, Branton. He corrected us when we used the term gray and said that they are actually white. The Tau sessions feel that the abductions being carried out by some of the Greys are a great injustice to humanity. They are a parasitic race that has and is preying on human civilizations throughout the universe, Oscar relayed. He added that our government's involvement with the Greys is very dangerous and out of control. Oscar is adamant that the butt people, that is Oscar's term for these creatures, Branton, are using human fluids for sustenance. They feed by immersing their arms in vats and rubbing the fluids on their bodies. He claims that they are also kidnapping children. To our knowledge, Oscar had in no way at the time been in contact with John Lear nor any other researcher who has alleged this exact same thing. Oscar's claim that these creatures are more whitish or albino in color would seem consistent with accounts concerning some branches of the serpent race. As Oscar alleges, not all Greys have been described as having the same coloring. Some have been described as plain gray, others blue-gray, gray-green, or grayish-white. One source suggests that the coloring has a direct connection with the amount of protein formula which they have access to. Also, Oscar's reference to the butt people may be based on the fact that the reptilian branch known as the Greys and others branches of the serpent race are often said to resemble praying mantis-like creatures in that their eyes are sometimes bug-like and protruding, and their long arms which often reach down below their knees often appear mantis-like when in their folded or reposed position, elbows pointed downwards and clawed hands positioned above. In fact, some of the early saurians such as the Tyrannosaurus rex kept their arms in such a position, elbows pointed down, although many of the modern sauroids possess arms which are now much longer. But a more likely explanation is one that has been given by researcher Ray Keller. Keller's sources indicate that reptilian greys from Reticuli have created a sub-race by assimilating genetic materials from another intelligent and malevolent alien species of insectoids. Therefore some of the greys being observed by abductees may actually be reptilian insectoid genetic hybrids. John Lear stated in his infamous UFO document, which he posted on the Paranet computer bulletin board, that some of the beings recovered from the earlier crashed disks were mantis-like and reptilian-skinned. The possibility of little children being abducted and used for their secretions and body organs is almost too horrible to contemplate. There may be other indications that such is the case, whether one chooses to believe it or not. For instance, 1. Bill English, son of an Arizona state legislator and a former Green Beret commander, allegedly viewed the top-secret Grudge/Blue Book report No. 13 years after he investigated a downed aircraft which radioed an encounter with a UFO, and whose occupants were later found mutilated. He stated that this secret document contained eyewitness descriptions of children who had been abducted by Grey-type entities, one of them being abducted on a farm right in front of the parents, and never seen again. 2. The August 1940 issue of National Geographic detailed the disappearance of 30 children and their teachers in some catacombs below the island of Malta. Sources contemporary to the event stated that they had entered a burial chamber in the third or lowest level of the hypogeum of Halsaflini, an orifice which was rumored to lead to deeper catacombs. The ancient catacombs were discovered below the small village of Casal Paula in 1902 when workmen literally fell into it while digging. They discovered over 30,000 bones and evidence of ancient human sacrifice conducted by an old Neolithic race. Witnesses to the disappearance said that a sudden cave-in had blocked the opening after the last child had gone through, but the rope they used to tie themselves to the lower room was found to be clean-cut, and many reported hearing the crying and wailing of children from below ground weeks after the disappearance. According to researcher Riley Crabb of the Borderland Sciences Research Foundation, a British Embassy employee by the name of Miss Louise Jessup entered the lower catacombs a few days before the disappearance, catacombs which she described as being immense. She allegedly encountered a sudden and mysterious wind which blew out her candle, following which she felt something wet and slippery brush past her. Needless to say, she left the scene in a hurry. Nevertheless, this account indicates how children sometimes tend to disappear in the presence of aerial or subsurface phenomena. 3. John Lear also claims, based upon accounts given to him by several contacts of his Indian intelligence community, that there is evidence that a percentage of America's missing children have been taken by these creatures, the Greys, suggesting that the aliens largely prey on the weak and defenseless among the human race. It is uncertain, however, what percentage of missing children might be involved here. Lear, in his press release of June 3, 1988, stated in reference to human abductees and victims of human mutilation, the various parts of the body are taken to various underground laboratories, one of which is known to be near the small New Mexico town of Dulce. This jointly occupied CIA alien facility has been described as enormous, with huge tiled walls that go on forever. Witnesses have reported huge vats filled with amber liquid with parts of human bodies being stirred inside. These secretions obtained are then mixed with hydrogen peroxide and applied on the skin of the Greys by spreading or dipping parts of their bodies in the solution. The body absorbs the solution, then excretes the waste back through the skin. Like reptiles excrete waste through the shedding of their skins. Branton, this would confirm Oscar's single quote claims to this effect. 4. Researcher William Cooper, who was formerly a chief petty officer and intelligence worker in the Pacific Naval Fleet, pointed out at the 1989 Muffin Conference in Las Vegas that over 3,000 children disappear without a trace yearly in one part of Manhattan alone. We might relate this to other obscure though evident indications that Manhattan literally sits atop vast underground caverns which have been confirmed by different sources, including Con Edison when they broke into a vast cavity at a depth of 200 feet while drilling in a Manhattan park. Cooper also claimed to have seen top-secret reports stating that sections of human bodies were found stored on disks retrieved from crash recovery sites, and that the government was extremely disturbed by this aspect of the alien activity. 5. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts of women who had been a few months along in a pregnancy, most often an unexplained pregnancy, only to find after a UFO abduction experience that their baby suddenly disappeared. These accounts are reality. It is very unlikely that hundreds or thousands of women would collectively use the same bizarre, identical excuse if they themselves aborted a child and did not wish others to think that they did so, especially when many of these women were the only ones who knew of the pregnancy. 6. Although many of the children who are allegedly abducted and never seen again are of the homeless or unwanted type, street children of prostitutes, and so on, children who will not be missed as much as others, it also appears that thousands of children who belong to middle-class families are also being abducted, implanted and returned. Since the disappearance of these would cause far more waves than a child without a guardian, they are used instead for purposes of manipulation. It appears that these infernal creatures are extremely cautious and cunning, and have hidden their tracks and even their very existence well, at least up until the 1970s to 1980s when abductions started to make the news in a profound way. Forrest Crawford continues. Oscar, based on what Hank communicated to him, claims that they are also kidnapping children. The Tau sessions have been preyed upon by these aliens before, and they are working with other races and communities that were also victims. One such race, emphasis ours, Branton, that Oscar claims was run off their home planet by the Bug people was what we now call the Nordics or Pleiadians. He claims, because of his ongoing contacts, he was made aware of the Billy Meyer case in Switzerland and swears that is a real contact. I find all these comments interesting, especially when you consider one investigative detail of this case. I have seen Oscar's house, his mother's house, his workshop and truck, and at no time were any books, magazines, transcripts or movies about any subject, let alone recent UFO material, found. Could he be an avid reader of the latest and most controversial UFO documents and just be hiding them when we come over? This is highly unlikely since, without a phone, our visits were always unannounced. Oscar wants people to know that if they are contacted by the Tau sessions, humans such as he described, to not be afraid because they are here to help. This attitude is reflected in correlations with a totally independent case involving a woman near Springfield, Illinois. Jill Walport relates an ongoing and very serious involvement with gray aliens. After Bud Hopkins, whose research inspired the May 1992 CBS network miniseries, Intruders, Branton spoke to her at length. The case was recommended to John Carpenter, State Section Director of Missouri Muffin, and then to myself. The intensity and detail of the case is reminiscent of Debbie Tomey's Kathy Davis experiences. In my first interview with Jill, she asked if anyone had ever been abducted/contacted by more than one race or group of aliens. I told her that it was reported with some frequency and asked her which other one she had seen with the Greys. She said it was a totally separate contact and that they did not like the Greys. When asked about their appearance, she reported that they were human, approximately about 5.5 feet in height, 180-200 pounds but not fat, tanned-looking skin with short haircuts that laid flat against their heads. I asked her to describe their eyes, ears, nose and mouth. She said all features were essentially normal except the nose was broad and flat and their eyes were brown. Oscar reported the weight of Hank to be 190 pounds and 5 feet 7 inches tall. He also noted the broad, flat nose. Even this aspect is not unusually alien to Earth, being that many of the dark races possess broad facial features. Branton. Jill informed me that the aliens told her they didn't like what some of the aliens were doing to her without her consent. They had come to help her learn how to overcome the deceptions of the Greys and to protect herself. They explained that she needed to psychically build a shield around herself, like a brick wall, when they came for her. This would help keep her from being deceived by their mind tricks. She tried it the next time the Greys came over her and it seemed to work. According to many accounts, mere willpower does not always guarantee that one will escape the overlapping deceptions and psychic manipulations of the serpent race or the Greys. Divine intervention is, according to some, the only fail-safe way to ensure oneself from being entangled by their deceptions, which are often deep, complex, and extremely subtle. There are actually accounts where people on the verge of being abducted began to pray, at which point the potential abductors left the scene. Also Clifford Stone, a high-level military officer based at Roswell, New Mexico, who has received much criticism from his higher-ups for his insistence on telling the public what he knows about the Greys, says that several skirmishes between the United States troops and alien Greys broke out in the jungles of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, some of them ending in tragedy on our side. However, one case involved a soldier who was a reborn Christian, who had a girlfriend in a particular village. During one visit he came upon a landed craft and some Greys that were trying to entice some of the townsfolk to take a ride, possibly a permanent one, aboard their ship. The soldier came between the villagers and the Greys, and although his semi-automatic weapon had little effect against their bulletproof uniforms, The Bible he carried and the cross he wore did have a definite adverse and weakening effect against the intruders, which immediately left the scene. Stone also confirmed that there have been many dogfights between the Nordics and the Greys that the government is aware of. Source: article by Robert W. Boyajian and UFO Universe, Spring 1988. In reference to Jill, Forrest Crawford continues. At this point the correlation counter in my mind was working overtime, so I decided to go for gold and ask her if they told her where they were from. Believe it or not, she replied, "Tausitai, does that make any sense?" Later I mentioned to Oscar that I was investigating a case that involved intense interaction with Greys and Tau sessions showing up to help. He asked where the case was from and I told him near Springfield, Illinois. He rattled off a very accurate description of Jill and said he was aware that she had been contacted. Horvitz showed several pictures of people from the archives of ufology, one of which was Drake. Oscar immediately picked Drake's photo from the stack and one could see the anger come over his face at the sight of this man. Follow-up research by Horvitz produced an interesting set of circumstances. The crash in question happened in 1961. Some of you will remember that Drake headed the OSMA program, the predecessor to SETI. In 1961 Drake announced that OSMA, in its search for intelligent extraterrestrial radio signals, would first look to the stars Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. During one interview with Oscar, Crawford became concerned about the logistics of a tunnel system stretching from California to North Dakota to Washington, D.C., etc., attempting to correlate this with their background in science. According to what Oscar revealed to Crawford and his research companion, it became evident that this was not feasible. With careful questioning it was discovered, according to Oscar, that the tunnels went only a short distance and did not actually connect to the North Dakota base. The capsule shuttle was accelerated and then a time/space window was opened. The exit door of the time/space window simultaneously opened at the prescribed destination where the capsule would appear in a tunnel and decelerate. One must wonder why an entire half-hour was necessary for such an instantaneous transit, unless a tremendous speed was necessary to attain the subspace jump. There are accounts as given by researcher William Hamilton and others that some of the subterranean societies beneath America, the Telosians for instance, possess a tube shuttle system. From his description it appears however that the Telosians utilized actual vacuum tube shuttle tunnels which stretch for hundreds if not thousands of miles. Perhaps the early shuttle systems constructed by ancient technically advanced societies were of this variety, and were replaced or upgraded with time/space windows later? Is it possible that the government's eventual and alleged discovery of ancient tunnels, leading to this particular subsurface colony, has led to a joint Telosian-American use of the ancient sub-shuttle systems? Or are the tunnels referred to by Oscar entirely the United States government constructions? Also, a similar network of vacuum tube shuttle tunnels is also set to converge below Dulce, New Mexico, according to many sources. These are allegedly used mostly by the Greys, and possibly by certain mind-controlled Samib-type groups who may be working for them. The technology for the teleport tunnels described by Oscar Branton was supposedly a combination of our own knowledge, rooted in the Philadelphia experiment, and acquired alien technology. Oscar also talked about the geological location of time/space/dimension doors. These places allow an easy entry of extraterrestrial craft into our atmosphere. Two such large natural doorways were reported to be just northeast of Seattle, Washington and south of the Apostle Islands in Lake Superior. An interesting possible correlation with the predicted natural time/space windows can be found in studying patterns on special energy maps. One such map is the Booger Gravity Anomaly Map. Oddly enough, a fairly local low-gravity area can be found at the locations mentioned by Oscar, not only near Seattle and the Apostle Islands, but also in Missouri, where Oscar claimed to have had most of his subsequent contacts meetings with the Tau sessions. Branton. My research is finding some interesting patterns emerging by comparing the location of gravity anomalies, Indian reservations, military bases and cavern entrances. These specialty maps can be purchased at great prices from Geoscience Resources. 2990 Anthony Road, Burlington, North Carolina, 27215. One last note on the above account. William Cooper describes another incident involving a reptilian, Grey, which was allegedly recovered from a crash retrieval in the Southwest. Enormous efforts were taken to try to save the life of this ugly little beast, which had a tendency to lie its way through subsequent interviews with military intelligence. Yet when it came to an actual human alien like Hank, certain people could apparently have cared less for his/their personal welfare. Cooper also alleged that the secret government for a large part refused to ally themselves with the Nordics or human aliens who warned them about the malevolence of the Greys, and chose instead to go ahead and form an alliance with the reptilian Greys, since an Illuminati Grey alliance would seemingly help the cause of the power elite serpent cults, who were making a killing off of exploiting the masses, a practice which the Greys themselves encouraged and assisted in. One claim is that the serpent cultists working in the government already maintained an ages-old pact with these draconian powers, and one can reason that because of this they may have refused the advances of the Nordics. Apparently these did not desire to accept the conditions required by the Nordics, which included the discontinuation of nuclear weapons proliferation and the cessation of multi-billion-dollar war efforts which, according to many sources, have also filled the pockets of the secret government which covertly operates through secret societies in nearly every country. Such wars, conflicts, revolutions, etc., many believe, have been directly influenced and orchestrated by the serpent cult or secret society groups. The pathetic individuals responsible for formulating the alliance pact with the Saurian Greys instead of with our Nordic cousins who now make up an interstellar federation of worlds very similar to the one depicted in Star Trek literally sold out our nations to the beast. Let's pray that the situation is not irredeemable. For one's information, a brief description of just what the Illuminati is might be helpful at this point. Many researchers suggest that the Illuminati is a Jesuit invention or reinvention simply because Illuminati founder Adam Weishaupt, who started the order in Bavaria, Germany, was a Jesuit. Also, the Scottish Rite of Masonry, which advocates the destruction of national sovereignties in exchange for Illuminati government, has allegedly been traced back to the Jesuit College at Clermont in Paris, as have been other Jesuit-initiated Masonic rites. The Jesuits themselves were founded by Ignatius Loyola, who had been previously arrested in Spain for subversive activities as a Gnostic. The order was admittedly founded mainly for the purpose of crushing Martin Luther's Protestant movement, which protested Rome's denunciation of the plan of eternal salvation by grace as it appears in the Book of Romans. This is evidenced by the fact that the Jesuit oath, which advocated the killing of Protestant men, the cutting off of the breasts of Protestant women with shears, and the cutting open of the wombs of Protestant women so that their unborn children could be smashed against the rocks, was fulfilled to the letter during the well-documented and bloody Roman Inquisitions. These took place during the Dark and Middle Ages of so-called Holy Roman Empire rule, which began when the last of the emperors or Pontifex Maximus of the Roman Empire, Constantine, declared himself to be the first official Roman pontiff or pope. Constantine paid lip service to Christianity, yet secretly held to the ancient Babylonian mystery religion of which he himself was high priest or Pontifex Maximus, one in a long line of many which can be traced back to Nimrod, the first king of Babylon, himself. This statement may raise anger in some who religiously defend man-made traditions. However, history is history and facts are facts. If one doesn't believe that Constantine intended to carry on his Roman Empire and its conquest of the world under the veneer of religion, then just remember what the Roman Spanish conquistadors did to the Mayas under Cortés, who slaughtered over 5 million of them. See Travels. PBS Network, February 15, 1993, the Incas under Pizarro, and the Pueblos under Coronado. The Illuminati allegedly began in ancient Babylon and is said to be a mixture of Kabbalism, the ancient Babylonian mystery religion, and ancient Ba worship. Their vision was the same as that of Nimrod, aka Osiris, Baal the sun god and consort of Semiramis, Isis, or Ashtaroth respectively. Nimrod was the original king of Babylon and the builder of the Tower of Babel. Some sources allege that the CIA and the Nazi movements were tied into the Illuminati, and that later these two organizations under the cult of the all-seeing eye joined forces in an effort to initiate plans for a world dictatorship. Part of this would of course involve working with the Greys and other Saurian species in underground bases in a joint effort to establish absolute world despotism. The Illuminati, or the serpent cult, is allegedly infiltrating political, economic, educational and religious institutions, with the help of the Greys, which have admitted to some that they have been the guiding power behind witchcraft and many of the ancient occult lodges over the centuries, which have promised the Illuminati a part of the pie once this world is under their control. This infiltration is allegedly carried out through organizations like the International Working Man's League, which according to world economists such as Dr. John Coleman molded Karl Marx and his future as a communist dictator. Another key figure in the connection between the Illuminati, Masonry and the Jesuit Lodge was the Jesuit priest Giuseppe Mazzini, the second-in-command to Universal Pontiff of Freemasonry Albert Pike, and who according to some inside sources even went so far as to organize a branch of the Mafia known as the Arblanica within one of the 22 Palladium lodges which were initiated to oversee world Illuminati revolutionary activities, carefully hiding its connection with the Grand Lodge in England. The Illuminati headquarters in America may be hidden within the Masonic House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. Click image right, Scottish Rite headquarters, which is curiously enough set atop the pentagram-like street layout of the city itself. Former 33rd degree Mason and past master of all Scottish Rite bodies, Evangelist Jim Shaw, P.O. Box 884. Silver Springs, Florida 32668, tells of his own defection from the cult in his book The Deadly Deception. Shaw reveals the fact that the inside of the Scottish Rite headquarters is filled with carvings, murals and many other representations of serpents. The High Masons apparently revered the serpent symbol in what might be considered worshipful awe. Thus the name of their ancient cult, which William Cooper refers to as the cult of the snake or dragon, a serpent cult which was very active among the ancient Gnostic serpent cults of Pharaohic Egypt. Even General George Washington was a member of the Stonemasons Guild early on. However, when he learned that it was being infiltrated by the Bavarian German Illuminati, he left the lodge. This infiltration was also confirmed by the presidents of Yale and Harvard universities, who discovered that two fraternities, Yale's Skull and Bones and Harvard's Scroll and Key, had been infiltrated by this German occult lodge in an attempt to gain highly educated initiates who would be used to carry out their future plans for world control, plans which included the destruction of nation-states to be replaced by a world dictatorship, which they called the New World Order. There are even allegations that Skull and Bones grads helped to finance the Communist and Nazi parties for the Illuminati's Machiavellian world scenario, which included the orchestration of world conflicts, pitting various nations or factions against each other for the purpose of eventually beating the nations of the earth into a global dictatorship or New World Order. Synthesis. If this report is beginning to sound like an over-budget spy movie or a science fiction thriller, then, as they say, you ain't seen nothing yet. The Knights of Malta and the Club of Rome are also, according to conspiracy researchers, players in the end game, in which the meek of the earth are the pawns. Both have advocated genocide to curb the population problem, since a true world socialist dictatorship can only survive if the population is kept to a controllable minimum. The Common Core are essentially outward arms or branches of the Illuminati, according to many. There are even rumors that tunnels and catacombs beneath Rome connect or at one time connected with others beneath the island of Malta, and that a similar subterranean system utilized by the Western Illuminati exists beneath Washington, D.C. as well. In fact, Dr. John Coleman, in his report, Freemasonry and the One World Government, C/A World Intelligence Review, P.O. Box 507, Chalmette, Louisiana 70044, wrote before the AIDS threat became widely known among the public, that a secret society equivalent to today's Illuminati believed that it was their duty as the self-anointed gods over humanity to keep the population of the world from getting out of control so that they could be more easily controlled. These ancient alchemists, Coleman alleges, were responsible for the Black Plague and other scourges which killed millions. He was convinced that they were preparing to wipe away millions more through viral warfare. According to Coleman, who claims to be an ex-intelligence worker for the British government who defected when he learned the horrible truth, the Illuminati consists of the dual lodges of Jesuitism and Freemasonry. He also documents all manner of infiltration of religious, political, and economic movements by the Illuminati of Jesuit Freemasonry, as well as their seemingly endless manipulations of the nations by their behind-the-scenes orchestrating of economic turmoil, revolutions and wars. In 1988, in apparent confirmation of this, a former high-ranking military officer by the name of F.B. Farrell, Lieutenant Colonel retired, U.S.F., released a disturbing report to several patriot organizations which allege this very thing. Lieutenant Colonel Farrell was a first lieutenant, captain and jet fighter pilot in Korea, and a lieutenant colonel and air liaison officer, 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, in Vietnam. In essence, Farrell accuses the United Nations as being a Trojan horse cover for a world socialist revolution, which intends to weaken and eventually destroy the independence of the American Republic. Farrell accuses the UN of being a socialist communist-controlled organization, and names at least 13 United Nations Secretary-Generals who have been communist nationals. It was decided long ago, Farrell states, that no one who was loyal to the United States Constitution was to ever be UN Secretary General. He also provided documentation that the United Nations police action into which young Americans were drafted betrayed the American troops at every turn, by intentionally leaking the United States battle plans in both the Korean and Vietnam wars to the communists. This is why, he explains, both of these no-win wars were lost to the communists. In relation to General MacArthur, who interesting enough publicly predicted that World War III would be fought against aliens in space, Farrell states that, when General MacArthur woke up to the treason of President Truman and the Soviets in the United Nations, he made one of the greatest military performances ever ventured in modern warfare. His dangerous but magnificent military engagement and sea landing at Incheon on September 15, 1950, enabled his military forces to slaughter the communist forces, destroy their massive supply dumps, and put the Red Chinese, North Koreans, and their Soviet advisors on the run. MacArthur never asked for permission from the United Nations Security Council Soviet General Zinchenko to perform this secret military operation. MacArthur handpicked close and loyal military officers in doing so, and they kept the lid on the entire operation. Originally, our forces were to never win any battles as planned by the Soviet generals at the United Nations. But General MacArthur realized the treason and took positive action not only to save the lives of his fighting forces and destroying the enemy in their supply dumps, but also creating the turning point of the Korean War with his success at Incheon. For this positive action, General Douglas MacArthur was relieved of his command of the United Nations fighting forces in Korea by the traitor President Harry S. Truman, who met with MacArthur on the island of Guam. MacArthur had figured out the whole picture of treason and had to be relieved of his job. Truman feared MacArthur so much that just prior to General Douglas MacArthur returning to the United States from Korea, the traitor Truman hid out at Camp David for over 3 weeks in fear of being arrested by General MacArthur, who was a 5-star general and in command of all military forces in the United States. The same man WHO had just saved the lives of thousands of their sons with daring military moves against the wishes of the United Nations Command, in routing the Red Chinese and North Koreans at Incheon, South Korea. Now you know the real truth as to what really happened behind the scenes during the Korean conflict between the traitor Truman and General Douglas MacArthur, the real hero. Robert W. Lee, in his book entitled The United Nations Today, CPA Books. 33836 S.E. Kelso Road, Number 6. P.O. Box 596. Barring, Oregon 97099, states on pages 20 and 21, General MacArthur was worried by a series of directives from Washington, Truman, which were greatly decreasing the potential of my Air Force. First, I was forbidden hot pursuit of enemy planes that attacked our own. Manchuria and Siberia were sanctuaries of inviolate protection for all enemy forces and for all enemy purposes, no matter what depredations or assaults might come from there. Then I was denied the right by Soviet General and United Nations to bomb the hydroelectric plants along the Yalu River. The order was broadened to include every plant in North Korea which was capable of furnishing electric power to Manchuria and Siberia. Most incomprehensible of all, according to MacArthur, was the refusal to let him bomb a supply target which was not in Manchuria or Siberia, but many miles from the border. It forwarded supplies from Vladivostok for the North Korean army. I felt that step by step my weapons were being taken away from me. This is exactly the same type of treason that occurred against our military forces in Vietnam. But Vietnam was far more violent and dirty in the length or time that our soldiers were betrayed. MacArthur continues on page 21, that there was some leak in intelligence was evident to everyone. Brigadier General Walton Walker continually complained to me that his operations were known to the enemy in advance through sources in Washington. Information must have been relayed to them, assuring that the Yalu River bridges would continue to enjoy sanctuary and that their bases would be left intact. General MacArthur then referred on page 21 to an official leaflet published in Red China by Chinese General Lin Pao. I would never have made the attack and risked man and military reputation if I had not been assured that Washington, Truman and the United States Congress would restrain General MacArthur from taking adequate retaliatory measures against my lines of supply and communication. J. Reuben Clark, Jr., former Undersecretary of State and Ambassador to Mexico, who was widely recognized as one of the nation's foremost international lawyers, stated on page 27 of the book entitled, The United Nations Today, not only does the Charter Organization not prevent future wars, but it makes it practically certain that we shall have future wars, and as such wars it takes from us, the United States, the power to declare them, to choose the side on which we shall fight, to determine what forces and military equipment we shall use in the war, and to control and command our sons who do the fighting. In fact, a Soviet general in the United Nations still writes the plans for employment of United States troops all over the world, even in the Persian Gulf today. Former President John F. Kennedy also felt the wrath of the United Nations Charter that Truman and the United States Congress signed during the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba against the communist Castro. The Soviets and the United Nations would not allow Kennedy to directly use the United States military forces available in destroying Castro. The Soviets stated that in using United States military forces at the Bay of Pigs without the approval of the Soviets and the United Nations, would be a violation of the United Nations Charter that the United States had signed and had to abide with. By now you should have come to realize why there were so many restrictions on our soldiers during combat in Korea and Vietnam and why we were not allowed to win. Not allowed to bomb certain targets. The Vietnam War was also allowed to continue to weaken the resistance of the people in the United States against any type of war or fight against communism. To accept anything would be better in the minds of the masses than to accept war and having their sons killed, even if it meant the merging of our entire government with that of the Soviet Union. Other evidence which tends to confirm this Masonic-Jesuit connection, as exposed by Dr. John Coleman and others, comes from an essay titled, The Twin Pincers, Masonry and Catholicism, written, understandably, anonymously. The manuscript stated, 35 years before the Jesuits were kicked out of France by a Roman Catholic king, Pope Clement XII issued his bull against Masonry. The Bourbon French king, Louis XVI and his queen Marie Antoinette, were beheaded by an Illuminati-inspired mob of Masons and terrorists. Why was this Catholic family, the Bourbons, so opposed to the Jesuits? It is, by the way, very interesting that a family like the Bourbons, who had opposed the Jesuits, were brought down eventually by the French Revolution's Illuminati Masonic reign of terror, pointing to the almost obvious fact that the Jesuits ordered the Masons to carry out the revolution. 2. Why did Frederick the Great of Prussia refuse to have the so-called enemies of Masonry, the Catholic Order of Jesuits, banned in Prussia in 1773? Could the insiders of the Jesuits also be Masons? Note, Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry states that Frederick was initiated as a Mason at Brunswick on the night of the 14th of August, 1738. 3. The Roman Catholic Stuarts were Masons from Scotland. The Stuart, James II, tried to set up the Jesuits in positions of power when he became King of England in 1685. 4. Between the Stuarts and the Jesuits at Lyons, France, and the Jesuit College of Clermont, in Paris, the Rite of Perfection evolved, out of which, the Masonic authorities have quoted, traced today's ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. 5. Rebold, a Masonic authority, and Mackey do not exactly agree on the part Chevalier de Bonneville played in the Rite of Perfection. Bonneville may not have been a Jesuit, but when we look at the part he played in the Rite of Strict Observance, we see many indications that he was a Jesuit. According to Burke McCarty's book The Suppressed Truth about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, several United States presidents who had come out in opposition against Jesuit Masonry had been targeted by the Illuminati for assassination. McCarty states, 1. President William Henry Harrison. In 1841, General William Henry Harrison of Ohio was elected president by a large majority. The loyalty of the Union toward General Harrison was above question, and it was the aim of the power of Leopoldins, a great Jesuit spy system, to defeat him. In his inaugural address, President Harrison said, "We admit of no government by divine right, believing that so far as power is concerned, the beneficent Creator has made no distinction among men, that all are upon an equality, and that the only legitimate right to govern is upon the express grant of power from the governed." With these unmistakable words, President Harrison made his position clear. He hurled defiance to the divine right enemies of our popular government. He did more, for those words signed his death warrant. Just 1 month and 5 days from that day, President Harrison lay a corpse in the White House. He died from arsenic poisoning, administered by the tools of Rome. The Jesuit oath had been swiftly carried out. Note, for a copy of the Jesuit oath, refer to pages 99-102 of William Cooper's book Behold a Pale Horse, C/Olight Technology Publishing. P.O. Box 1495. Sedona, Arizona 86336. The oath appears in Chapter 3, Oath of Initiation of an Unidentified Secret Order. Although Cooper suspects the oath might have originated from the Jesuits or the Knights of Malta, he is uncertain. However, Dennis Passero and other researchers have published exact duplicates of the oath which appears in Cooper's book, and state that it is the Jesuit oath, thus confirming Cooper's suspicions. It basically states that the Jesuit is through all means moral or immoral. The immoral acts can supposedly be forgiven if they are done in the name of the Roman Church. To devote their life to bringing about the destruction of the Protestant movement, and to bringing all nations under the control of Rome for the glory of the Queen of Heaven, no doubt the same pagan goddess worshipped by the ancient Babylonians, none other than the ancient Queen Semiramis, to whom we can credit the post-Diluvian resurgence of witchcraft. Many allege that the Roman Church is nothing more than the continuation of the ancient Roman Empire which sought to dominate the world, and that they merely donned religious garb when they discovered that religious feeling was an enormously effective way to control the masses. The fact that Constantine was the last official Roman emperor and the first official Roman pope is cause for great suspicion. McCarty continues, "Allow me to quote for you from the United States Senator Benton's 30 Years View, Volume 2, page 21, regarding the death of President Harrison. There was no failure of health or strength to indicate such an event or excite apprehension that he would not go through his term with the same vigor with which he commenced it. His attack was sudden and evidently fatal from the beginning." And at the close of the chapter in Senator Benton's book, we read this significant bit of information which should be well pondered concerning Harrison's family, that the deceased president had been closely preceded and was rapidly followed by the deaths of almost all of his numerous family, sons and daughters. That is, extirpation with a vengeance, is it not? Note, the Jesuit oath calls for members of the order to extirpate the enemies of Rome. Branton, 2. President Zachary Taylor, in his first message to Congress, he said, "But attachment to the Union of States should be fostered in every American heart." For more than half a century, this union has remained unshaken. The arch-plotters, fearing that suspicion might be aroused by the death of the president early in his administration, as in the case of President Harrison, permitted him to serve 1 year and 4 months, when on the 4th of July, 1850, arsenic was administered to him during a celebration in Washington at which he was invited to deliver the address. He went in perfect health in the morning and was taken ill in the afternoon about 5 o'clock and died on the Monday following, having been sick the same number of days and with precisely the same symptoms as was his predecessor, President Harrison. 3. Attempt on President James Buchanan. He was invited to deliver an address on Washington's birthday, and made reservation at the National Hotel, which by the way was the headquarters of the Jesuit traders, for himself and his friends. The gentleman had had his ear to the ground evidently and heard the rumble of the abolitionists, and when the committee asked for a conference, he coolly informed them that he was president of the North, as well as the South. The following quotations from the New York Herald and the Post at the time chronicled what followed. The appointments favoring the North by the Jeff Davis faction will doubtless be accepted, and treated as a declaration of war, and a war of extermination on one side or the other. February 25, 1857, on Washington's birthday, Buchanan's stand became known and the next day he was poisoned. The plot was deep and planned with skill. Mr. Buchanan, as was customary with men in his station, had a table and chairs reserved for himself and friends in the dining room at the National Hotel. The president was known to be an inveterate tea drinker. In fact, Northern people rarely drank anything else in the evening. Southern men preferred coffee. Thus, to make sure of Buchanan and his Northern friends, arsenic was sprinkled in the bowls containing the tea and lump sugar and set on the table where he was to sit. The pulverized sugar in the bowls used for coffee on the other tables was kept free from poison. Not a single Southern man was affected or harmed. 50 or 60 persons dined at the table that evening, and as best can be learned, about 38 died from the effects of the poison. President Buchanan was poisoned, and with great difficulty his life was saved. His physicians treated him understandingly from instructions given by himself as to the cause of his illness, for he understood what was the matter. Researcher Dennis Passero also quoted the above in his Conspiracy Tracker newsletter, no longer being published. Being the avowed Catholic that he is, we cannot say that Passero had any particular bias against the Catholic Church in his exposition of the Jesuits, but that he saw the corruption in the Roman institution and exposed it. Passero has made some interesting comments in relation to Jesuit Masonry and the assassination of one of the most popular presidents in American history. President Abraham Lincoln. The subject of Lincoln's murder is too vast to be covered here. McCarty believes that the Jesuits and their tools, the Knights of the Golden Circle, were behind the crime. What is interesting is that President Harrison, Taylor, Buchanan, and of course Lincoln, were all strongly dedicated to the preservation of the Union, and all had made speeches indicating their stand. If the Jesuits wanted the Union split, they were not alone. In 1876, Otto von Bismarck had this to say: "The division of the United States into two federations of equal force was decided long before the Civil War by the high financial power of Europe. These bankers were afraid that the United States, if they remained in one bloc and as one nation, would attain economical and financial independence, which would upset their financial domination over the world." The voice of the Rothschilds predominated. They foresaw the tremendous booty if they could substitute two feeble democracies, indebted to the European financiers, to the vigorous republic, confident and self-providing. Therefore, they started their emissaries in order to exploit the question of slavery and thus dig an abyss between the two parts of the republic. While McCarty links the Golden Circle with the Jesuits, Dr. Stuart Crane says that the Golden Circle was financed by the Rothschilds. Note, Dr. John Coleman had stated in essence that the old line blue blood or black nobility families of Europe who claimed descendants from the ancient Roman emperors make up the link between the Rothschilds, who control Masonry, and the Jesuits, who control much of the Catholic world behind the scenes. Branton, in order to create a rift using the slavery problem, Golden Circle agents became known as abolitionists in the North, and as secessionists in the South. Even the fiery John Brown, who led the raid on Harper's Ferry, was financed by the international bankers. Every member of the Southern Cabinet belonged to the Golden Circle, as did every member of the Northern Cabinet with the exception of Lincoln and Secretary Seward. When things began getting rough for the Confederacy, the Rothschilds even planned an invasion of the United States by British troops swooping down from Canada, and by French forces established in Mexico under the Emperor Maximilian. But this did not come off because the Russian Tsar, whose government was later to be overthrown by the Bolshevik Revolution, Branton, said he would intervene on the side of the North if the European forces attacked. According to Mag General Count Sherep-Spiridovich, the Rothschilds had one of their agents in the Vatican, a Jewish Jesuit named Father Fisher, convince the Pope that the Vatican should finance Maximilian, who would in return re-establish Catholicism in Mexico, which had conveniently been abolished by Benito Juarez, a Freemason. Later, when the Civil War was over, the guerrilla army branch of the Knights of the Golden Circle headed for Mexico to aid Maximilian, who was running into trouble with the Juarez forces. This guerrilla force was under the command of Colonel William Quantrill, famous leader of Quantrill's raiders, and of Colonel Jesse James, later the famous outlaw. Like all Masonic secret societies, the guerrillas thought they were the top of the ladder, never realizing that there were higher-ups over them. For some reason, Jesse James earned the wrath of the Rothschilds, and the reward money later offered for his capture came from coffers of the House of Rothschild. See, Jesse James was one of his names, by Del Schroeder. Abraham Lincoln was able to foil the conspirators at every turn. He was aware of the activities of the Jesuits. See, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, by Charles Chinagaya, C/Ochick Publications. P.O. Box 662. Chino, California 91710. He took the Union Army and turned it into the most powerful fighting force the world has ever known. He issued the famous greenbacks, refusing to accept loans from the high financial power. For these reasons, and because he would not go along with the harsh measures of the Reconstruction, it was decided upon that he would die. John Wilkes Booth, a member of the Golden Circle and of the Carbonari, another Jesuit-connected lodge, Branton, was chosen as the tool to commit the crime. About a month before the assassination, Booth had traveled to Europe for a secret meeting with Napoleon III, also a member of the Carbonari. Note, a 1991 episode of Unsolved Mysteries alleged that Union sentries had been ordered to give Booth safe passage out of the city following the assassination. Branton. Napoleon III was surrounded by Jesuit advisors. See, This One Mad Act, by Forster, for a mention of the meeting. With Lincoln out of the picture, Golden Circle member Andrew Johnson became president. But, for some reason he pulled an about-face, and also failed to go along with the harsh Reconstruction measures. Because of this he became the only president to be impeached, though acquitted by one vote. It appears that the Rothschilds intended the Reconstruction period to be the Civil War equivalent to the French Revolution's reign of terror. Not content with the outcome of the war, it became necessary to keep the country divided via the injustices of the carpetbag governments. The high financial power realized that the South was really the heart and soul of the Republic. It was desired to destroy the economic base of the North, but to destroy the moral and spiritual base of the South. Individuality was the enemy of the collectivist conspirators, then as well as now. To keep a continual animosity going between the two parts of the country, it was decided that terrorism could be used against the Reconstruction governments. This terrorism could be used as an excuse to further strengthen these bogus governments. Terrorism could be used to frighten foes of abolition. Some of these terrorist acts included mutilation murders perpetrated by John Brown and his boys. According to Dr. Stuart Crane, the terrorist organization born at this time was the Ku Klux Klan, which emerged from the Knights of the Golden Circle. However, it appears that there were two clans operating at this time. One was headed by Nathan Bedford Forrest. This clan sought only to save the South and to avenge crimes and injustices. The other was the Golden Circle Child. This second clan was founded by Judah P. Benjamin, a Rothschild relative and Confederacy Secretary of State Cotner Baruch, Albert Pike, known as the Vice-Regent of Lucifer and as the Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry and by an UN named Jesuit priest. Further evidence in support of the allegations that the Illuminati is composed of both Jesuits and Masons is given by Robold. The argument is that the Illuminati is a secret arm of Jesuitism re-established by the Jesuit priest Weishaupt, while subversive 33rd-degree Masonry is a secret branch of the Illuminati. In other words, Rome operates as the head of the conspiratorial beast. The Illuminati is the neck, Masonry is its body, and the many neo-Masonic political, religious, fraternal and economic cults are the tentacles. Former 33rd-degree Mason Jim Shaw has even exposed dozens of Vatican officials who are also high-ranking Masons. Rebold, in his General History of Freemasonry in Europe, reveals the following Jesuit Masonic eggs that were hatched during the 18th century. Rite of the Old Daughter-in-Law, by Lockhart, an emissary of the Jesuits. In 1739. Rite of the Clerks of Strict Observance, or Clerical Templar System, founded by the Jesuits, and united in 1776. With the Secular Templars, also a creation of the Jesuits. Rite of the Knights of the East, by Perlet, a Jesuit emissary. 1757. Rite of the Emperors of the East and West, Sovereign Prince Masons. This was the rite which Haradam extended to the rite of perfection from which the Scottish rite of Masonry is evolved of about 25 degrees, by the Jesuits, and propagated by Perlet about 1758. Rite of the Flaming Star, founded by Baron Schutte, an emissary of the Jesuits in 1766. Rite of the Illuminati of Bavaria, by Professor Weishaupt, also a Jesuit. In 1776. Dr. William Campbell, M.D., a very knowledgeable virologist who to our knowledge had not even heard of Dr. John Coleman at the time when he first came out with his very disturbing revelations, seems to nevertheless confirm Coleman's suspicions of mass genocide through virological warfare. Campbell claims that in the course of researching the AIDS virus, he and his associates stumbled across a conspiracy almost too horrifying to believe. In an article titled, WHO Murdered Africa, which first appeared in the Health Freedom News, P.O. Box 688. Monrovia, California, 91016, he presented a great deal of documentation that the AIDS virus was not only manufactured artificially by splicing the bovine leukemia and sheep Visner retroviruses in a laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland, but that the World Health Organization, which is an arm of the Illuminati-affiliated Club of Rome according to Dr. John Coleman and others, as well as socialist communist elements, and the United Nations played a central role in its creation and intentional release into the world population. Is it possible that communism, like the Jesuit-infested Nazi Party itself, has acted as a secret weapon of the Jesuit Illuminati in its ongoing inquisition against Jews and Protestants, as well as governments such as the United States, which through its Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Declaration of Independence has challenged the world socialists to their face? Dr. John Coleman has stated, Karl Marx was one of the earliest members of the radical Mazzini movement starting in 1840. It is interesting to note that Marx, an avowed hater of religion, should so passionately espouse Jesuitism. Also, cult expositor Dave Hunt, in his SIB Bulletin, December 1980, states, during the summer of 1988 on PBS a number of representatives from the Kremlin were answering questions put to them by a live American audience. One of the Americans asked, what is the major cause of misunderstanding between the Soviet Union and the United States? The leader of the Kremlin delegation unhesitatingly replied, "The major problem is evangelical Christianity." Translated, Protestantism. In his book, Master Plan for Your Destruction, Arizona pastor Lee Gerard quotes from the Communist Socialist Instruction Book on Psychopolitics. "You must recruit every agency of the nation marked for slaughter into foaming hatred of religious healing. That any religious practice which might devote itself to mental healing is vicious, bad, insanity-causing, publicly hated and intolerable. You must suborn and recruit any medical healing organization into collusion in this campaign. Religious healing is largely a Protestant phenomena, the very group, revitalized by the German Martin Luther, whose destruction the Jesuit order in its south has sworn to carry out." Now back to the subject of the Illuminati conspiracy and its alleged connection with aerial and subsurface phenomena. There are some researchers who believe, aside from the revelations above, that there is a definite connection between the Illuminati and the alien group known to many researchers as the Men in Black. Jim Brandon, in his book Occult America, tells of an alleged underground installation below Washington, D.C. known as NUD, suggesting that the antediluvian constructors of this Atlantine substructure may have been descendants of Cain, see Genesis 4:16. The present inhabitants of this subterranean installation are allegedly an underground race of power trippers tied into the highest levels of the NSA-CIA, who are in turn in contact with Sirius Star people, or a group that some ufologists believe is the extraterrestrial extension of the Illuminati, also known as the Men in Black or the Nation of the Third Eye. The NUD and other similar facilities are reportedly not inhabited by antediluvians, but by people who later discovered these abandoned underground installations as well as the ancient technologies left there, which they learned to manipulate for good or evil. Brandon also mentions ancient tunnels discovered beneath Washington, D.C. that have been investigated by government scientists, some of which, according to still other sources, contain walls with a glass smooth but metal hard glaze. In connection with the German Illuminati, it is said that they now possess aerial discs which may be capable of leaving the Earth's atmosphere. These may explain some of the accounts of Aryan saucer pilots. However, Germans are not the only Aryan civilization to exist. Actually, Hitler's theory that the Germans were descended from Aryan stock may be just that, a theory. For instance, there were the Aryans who ruled ancient India thousands of years ago. Nevertheless, the German theory plays a definite role in ufology, although if true it apparently makes up only a minor percentage of encounters with humanoid or human-like entities. The popular theory is that sometime before World War II, German occultists, the same ones who gave rise to the Nazi Party, recovered a crashed disk and began to study and eventually to utilize its technology through various secret projects which allegedly utilized underground bases and factories that were used in attempts to duplicate the technology. The top-secret Nazi aerial disk research became more advanced throughout the Second World War, and reportedly utilized jet turbine and later electromagnetic propulsions. As it became apparent that the Germans were losing the war, they allegedly transferred this technology to a base in Antarctica which had been established years earlier, complete with underground installations and all, and codenamed the New Berlin. Throughout the entire duration of the war, the Nazis had allegedly shipped scientists, workers, technology and saucer components to this Antarctic base or bases. U.S. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd some years later conducted and led an exploration of the Antarctic region. The strange thing about the expedition was that the massive operation involved nearly 4,000 well-trained military naval troops, military vessels such as destroyers, subs, aircraft carrier and aircraft. Upon arriving at the polar continent, they reportedly split into 3 separate groups and began a massive reconnaissance-like operation. One source even claimed that Byrd's navy encountered resistance there and that there was a photo-finish fight between American and Nazi forces there, with losses on both sides. When the Americans left 2 weeks later, also strange for a scientific expedition, Byrd, after arriving home, reportedly went into a rage and began demanding that the government turn Antarctica into a nuclear test range. Byrd was sworn to secrecy and his diaries are sealed to this day. There are, in fact, some who claim to have encountered discs containing a swastika-like symbol, or occupants who spoke fluent German. Yet these accounts are still relatively few in comparison with accounts of other types of human cosmonauts encountered in other incidents, suggesting that the majority of human-like alien encounters may come from the so-called Federation, which consists of the Omo people or Omits from the star Imo or Wolf 424, the Vegans and Lyra, the Koldasians, Hyardines, and the Solarians, with their alleged tribunal on the moons of Saturn, the Tau Cetaceans and Epsilon Eridanians, the Alpha Centaurians, the Andromedans from the Andromeda constellation, and of course the Pleiadians, all of whom claim ties with ancient societies on Earth. As for the German Aryans, some sources indicate that they may have at one time been in league with the Greys, but that at least some of the second and third generations may no longer adhere as strongly to Hitler's mad obsession for global conquest, and some of these may in fact now be in opposition to the Greys. Certain accounts suggest that two German groups may possess anti-gravity technology, one based on the scientific developments of a group of German scientists who escaped Germany before the rise of Nazism, and the other group which consists of full-fledged Nazis. Once again returning to Oscar's single quote references concerning time/space windows. If Einstein's theories concerning the possibility of time/space anomalies are correct, then this might explain how a civilization could possibly travel from one star to another in a relatively short period of time. There is no evidence that time could ever be reversed without cancelling itself out in a paradox, although some claim that reverse time travel is possible, but that it is not possible to change the past. Yet there is a theoretical possibility that time/space might be suspended via some type of hyperspace. There is allegedly much technical information contained in the elusive Grudge/Blue Book Report No. 13, describing this aspect of physics. Some contactees even state that the forward flow of time is different in other parts of the galaxy, and that a day on Earth could constitute a week on another planet. In other words, a spacefaring race might have left Earth only a few thousand years ago, yet the time differentiation might have allowed 10,000 years to pass in their time. Others believe that the forward flow of time, or rather a particular being's passage through time, may also be altered through the manipulation of electromagnetic technology. Also, in relation to the apparent tug-of-war between the Greys single quote and the Nordics/Tau Cetaceans, etc., over individuals, as in the case of Jill, which we've related earlier, we have an apparently similar situation that was described in an intelligence report released by Leading Edge Research, formerly Nevada Aerial Research. This report stated, one contactee that has been contacted by the Blonde/Nordic race was captured and examined by the Greys after it was discovered by them that the blue beam used to paralyze people failed to have an effect on him. The implant device that the Nordics put in evidently neutralized the paralysis beam. It was said that the Greys came in a football-shaped craft. This is one more confirmation, among others, that actual conflict, if not warfare, exists between various segments of the Nordic Federation and Grey Empire. Now back to the center of the vortex where as both Grey and Nordic activity is concerned, that is, the Mojave Desert. The Mojave mysteries are not known only to small groups of researchers who meet in secret to discuss their latest findings. The subject of aerial as well as subsurface phenomena is gaining more respect as more evidence and documentation comes to light. Major motion picture studios are becoming interested in the phenomena, for instance the Showtime and Spielberg productions of Roswell. Television companies are also beginning to take these reports of alien encounters seriously, and we have had numerous documentary productions such as Sightings, Encounters, Unsolved Mysteries, X-Files, and so on. TV news magazines and TV talk shows have responded to the public interest. Even radio talk show personalities who are heard by millions coast to coast see the potential importance of what is happening to untold thousands of people who are describing essentially the same things. Art Bell has his Dreamland program, then there's Chuck Harder, Billy Goodman and others. According to an item which appeared in the Leading Edge magazine, a well-known Los Angeles talk show host by the name of Ken Hudnall announced over the air on November 3, 1989, his intention to take a group to visit one of the ancient underground cities, which he says is an entrance 60 miles from Anaheim, California. In 1962, a researcher by the name of Chuck Edwards released some of his own discoveries concerning what might be referred to as the Western Subsurface Drainage Network, which seems to cover parts of Utah, Nevada, and Southern California, where are located many drainage systems which do not ultimately flow into the Pacific Ocean via surface rivers, that is, but instead make their way underground into a vast subterranean drainage network. His letter appeared in issue 8 of The Hidden World, one of the few specialized publications which grew out of the Palmer-Shaver controversy of 1940-45, which appeared in Amazing Stories Science Fiction/Science Fact magazine. The controversy arose around Richard Shaver's claims to have inside knowledge of two subterranean races which possess the aerial discs, the Duros, which have been variously described as a race of ancient out-of-control Atlantine robots, degenerate human troglodytes, or a race of reptilian non-humans, or all three, who were at war with another much more benevolent and human subterranean race known as the Turos. The Turos were allegedly tormenting those on the surface of the Earth through psychic attack and electronic mind control from their underworld lairs, in preparation for a possible future invasion of the outer world. The answers to the aerial subsurface mystery remained rather confused during the Amazing Stories Shaver mystery period, possibly because of Shaver's perhaps well-intentioned but unwise attempt to inform the readers about the world beyond and the world below through science fiction stories. However, the readers were never clearly instructed as to where the fact ended and the fiction began, or because of editor Ray Palmer's attempt to occultize many of Shaver's stories with his own mystic occult philosophies, which Shaver accused him of doing. So it was in the wake of this period that investigators like Mr. Edwards were born. Some of the researchers of this period delved off into the metaphysical, seeking the answer to their questions from channeled supernatural entities who tickled their egos, yet whose intentions and revelations could not be physically substantiated. The fact that many of these occultists ended up with severe emotional or psychotic problems, in essence seeing a tarot under every bed and degenerating into schizophrenic paranoid behavior, would indicate that the greater majority of their sources were no doubt astral or alien deceivers out to mislead these seekers after truth. Others however retained their intellectual and analytical sanity and, although not discounting the presence of evil influences, did not so easily open themselves up to their lies and misleading propaganda, but set out to investigate the phenomena in a rational, sane, and intellectual manner. It is with this in mind that we quote from Chuck Edwards' letter. This letter is in reply to your January 31st letter. Please forgive me for not answering sooner. Enclosed is some material I hope that you can glean something of value from. Please be as candid as you have been in the past, and if I am far off base don't hesitate to tell me. Our foundation has located a vast system of underground passages in the mother lode country of California. They were first discovered in 1936, ignored by all even with our best efforts to reveal them. Recently a road crew blasted out an opening verifying our claims. One of the chambers is 200 feet long, 70 feet wide and 50 feet high. We have disclosed what we believe to be a vast subterranean drainage system probably traversing the great American desert country for a distance of more than 600 miles. We believe this system extends out like 5 fingers of your hand to such landmarks as Zion Canyon in Utah, the Grand Canyon. Another runs south from the Carson Sink in Nevada, and yet another follows below the western slope of the same range, joining its counterpart and ending somewhere in the Mojave Desert. We believe, contrary to orthodox geologists, that the existence of this underground system drains all surface waters running into Nevada. None, with the exception of the Amargosa, runs out, and accounts for the fact that it is a great American desert. The hairy creatures that you have written about have been seen in several of these areas. Certainly there has been much saucer activity in these parts. For 2 years I have collected material pertinent to these creatures, and if you have any opinions along these lines I would appreciate hearing them. So much for now. I hope that I am still your friend. Much of my time has been devoted to helping a farmer near Portland who has made a fantastic discovery of incredible stone artifacts. He has several tons of them. They predate anything yet found or accepted. Let us say that for now, we are making slow but steady progress in getting through the wall of orthodoxy. Chuck Edwards. Several years ago, subsurface researcher Richard Toronto reprinted a news article in his Shavert Run newsletter describing a municipal water director in Los Angeles. This official talked with a man who said that he was hired by the government to look for underground water sources for Camp Irwin in California. At one point the man and a partner came across an abandoned mine and decided to follow it to the bottom. Near the bottom he was surprised to discover an ancient earth fault which was wide enough for him and his companion to enter. They traversed this fault for a good distance until they finally emerged into a huge river cavern. To his surprise he saw before him a crystal pure underground river over a quarter of a mile wide which flowed through the passage and out of sight. Since learning of this incident, the municipal water director claims to have discovered at least 5 similar underground rivers. Some of these have allegedly been traced and were found to emerge from the continental slope below the surface of the oceans, and at least one of them into the Gulf of California. This might confirm the allegations made by one anonymous retired Navy officer that the Navy has knowledge of a vast system or labyrinth of aqua caverns which meander beneath the surface of California and even into other western states, and that these watery labyrinths exit out into the oceans via huge entrances in the lower walls of the continental slope. One of the more extravagant claims is that some of these aqua caverns are so large that they can be navigated by submarine, and that one nuclear submarine on a secret mapping mission in fact became lost within the maze and was never heard from again. 2 American nuclear submarines have disappeared without explanation in the past, the U.S. Scorpion and the U.S. Thresher. It is true that one woman who claimed to have had a very strong emotional bond with her husband who worked on the Thresher, insisted at the time that she just knew that her husband was still alive after the disaster. She said that she and her husband had such a spiritual emotional connection that they always knew when the other was in trouble. For information on the Navy's investigations of the Aqualab apparents via nuclear subs, etc., see California Floats on Ocean? Article in the March 1980 issue of John J. Williams Rebel magazine, which at the time was available from Consumertronics Company, C/O John J. Williams. President, 2011 Crescent Dr. P.O. Drawer 537. Alamogordo, New Mexico 88310. The Thresher incidentally disappeared on April 10, 1963 with a crew of 129 men under the command of John W. Harvey, USN. Researchers Will Carson and Jeannie Joy interviewed the woman mentioned above shortly after the disappearance. She said, "My husband was on the submarine Thresher when it disappeared. I don't consider myself a widow. I don't believe my husband is dead. No, it's not a matter of just not being able to believe it, to accept reality. I just can't get over the conviction that he's still alive somewhere. I love my husband very much. I know he loves me. We were very close. We could always tell when something was wrong with each other. Intuition, I guess. I should have felt something the instant there was trouble, if he was really in serious trouble and knew it, a matter of life and death, but I didn't." "What do you believe really happened?" Carson and Joy asked the attractive young woman. "Most people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I believe the Thresher was captured." "By whom?" "I can't say for sure, but there was a Russian submarine spotted near there that day, that is, near where it reportedly vanished 220 miles off Boston Harbor. Only I can't imagine how even the Russians could capture a vessel like the Thresher without leaving the slightest evidence." John J. Williams' source, the retired Navy officer whose credentials Williams verified, stated that an eccentric billionaire, Howard Hughes, financed the false Thresher recovery operation to satisfy the public and the media. Still more revelations concerning the Mojave subnet can be found in Burke Lee's book Death Valley Men, Macmillan Company, New York 1932. In his chapter, Old Gold, Lee describes a conversation which he had several years ago with a small group of Death Valley explorers. The conversation had eventually turned to the subject of Paiute Indian legends. At one point 2 of the men, Jack and Bill, described their experience with an underground city which they claimed to have discovered after one of them had fallen through the bottom of an old mine shaft near Wingate Pass. They found themselves in a natural underground cavern which they claimed they followed for about 20 miles north into the heart of the Panamint Mountains. To their amazement, they claimed, they found themselves in an huge, ancient, underground cavern city. This account will be quoted later on. However, in addition to this, Lee recorded yet another story of a Paiute Indian, not the same one referred to by Ogier Make, who may have stumbled into the deeper underground kingdom of the ancient race who built the city within the Panamints, a civilization that was still alive and thriving after thousands of years. During this lengthy conversation, wherein they first revealed the secret of the underground city to Lee and others, the discussion turned to the topic of a Paiute Indian legend that they had heard which was remarkably similar to an ancient Grecian myth. The Paiute legend concerned a tribal chief whose wife had died, and who according to the tradition took a spiritual journey to the underworld to find her, and upon returning with her he looked back, and since this was forbidden he was not allowed to bring his wife back with him from the dead. This legend would not be in the same vein as the more tangible story related earlier in the file, as told by the Navajo Ogier Make, concerning a Paiute chief who was allegedly physically taken into the underground cities of the Havamasuvs deep below the Panamints. After this legend was referred to, the conversation turned to a discussion of an alleged subterranean race, who were believed to inhabit very deep caverns far below the Death Valley territory. Paiute legends of the Havamasuvs indicate that these ancient dwellers of the Panamints abandoned the ancient city within the mountain itself and migrated to still deeper and larger caverns below. Could the following story tie in with the Paiute legends of the Havamasuvs? We will enter the conversation with the following discourse from Burke Lee. The professor and Jack and Bill sat in the little canvas house in Emigrant Canyon and heard the legend all the way through. The professor said, that story, in its essentials, is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Single quote. Why yes, I said. It's also a Paiute legend. Some Indians told that legend to John Wesley Powell in the 60s. That's very interesting, said the professor. It's so close a parallel to Orpheus and Eurydice that the story might well have been lifted bodily from the Greeks. Jack said, I wouldn't be surprised. I knew a Greek. I forgot his name, but he ran a restaurant in almost every mining town I ever was in. He was an extensive wanderer. The Greeks are great travelers. Bill said, they don't mean restaurant Greeks. The Greeks they were talking about have been dead for thousands of years. What of it? Asked Jack. Maybe the early Greeks was great travelers, too. The professor said, it's very interesting. No. About that tunnel, said Bill, with his forehead wrapped in a frown. You said this Indian went through a tunnel into a strange country, didn't you? Single quote. Why yes, I said. I think I called it a cave or a cavern, but I suppose a miner would call it a tunnel. Why? Here's the funny thing, said Bill. This Indian trapper living right across the canyon has a story about a tunnel, and it's not 1,000 years old either. Tom Wilson told me that his grandfather went through this tunnel and disappeared. He was gone 3 years, and when he came back he said he'd been in a strange country living among strange people. That tunnel is supposed to be somewhere in the Panamints not awful far from where we were sitting. Now, what do you make of that? Jack said, I think Tom's grandfather was an awful liar. I said, Tom's grandfather lived when the Paiutes were keeping their tribal lore alive. He probably knew the old legend. Powell heard it in Nevada only 65 years ago. It's very interesting, said the professor. I got an idea about it, said Bill, thoughtfully. Tom's grandfather might have wandered into some tunnelography from chewing Jimson weed and then come out and found some early whites and stayed with them. Tom told me that the people spoke a queer language and ate food that was new to his grandfather and wore leather clothes. They had horses and they had gold. It might have been a party in Panamint Valley, or even early explorers or early settlers in Owens Valley. How about that? Jack said, yeah. The Spaniards was in here, too. So it might have been Spaniards or the early Greeks. And, where is this tunnel? And why did Tom's grandfather have trouble speaking the language? This is an entirely different story than the one Buck told. We are arriving at no place at all with these Indians and Greeks. To return for a moment to our discussion of geology, Professor. Have you been in Nevada much? From here the conversation took off in an entirely new direction. Not only human faunauts have been encountered in the Mojave Desert region, but the so-called Greys as well. Is it possible that the Greys had their genesis on planet Earth thousands of years ago? The Nordics apparently did. This is the opinion of researcher Brad Steiger, who is convinced that the Greys are actually descended from a mutation of the Saurian race, which mysteriously disappeared from the Earth, therefore giving rise to the theory that they became extinct in spite of the fact that other saurians like the crocodiles, alligators and iguanas continued to survive. In 1967, UFO researcher Brad Steiger co-authored with Joan Reitner, later Joan O'Connell, a book titled, Flying Saucers Are Hostile. Regarding the intentions of many of the occupants behind the phenomena, Steiger and Reitner stated, certain saucer cultists, who have been expecting space brethren to bring along some pie in the sky, continue to deliver saucer-inspired sermons on the theme that the saucers come to bring starry salvation to a troubled world. The self-appointed ministers who preach this extraordinary brand of evangelism ignore the fact that not all saucers can be considered friendly. Many give evidence of hostile actions. There is a wealth of well-documented evidence that UFOs have been responsible for murders, assaults, burning by direct ray focus, radiation sickness, kidnappings, pursuits of automobiles, attacks on homes, disruption of power sources, paralysis, mysterious cremations, and destructions of aircraft. Dozens of reputable eyewitnesses claim to have seen alien personnel loading their space vehicles with specimens from Earth, including animals, soil and rocks, water, and struggling human beings. Steiger, who also authored the books, Flying Saucer Invasion, Target Earth, and The Flying Saucer Menace, as well as several others, also believe that the entities most often encountered are not only hostile, as indicated by the above quote, but non-human and in fact reptilian or saurian in nature. In relation to this, there is the following statement which was recently made by Steiger in his popular video film, The Truth About UFOs. Steiger has, to some extent in his video, changed his tune concerning the nature of these reptilian beings, supposing now that they aren't as evil as he made them out to be in earlier years. However, the facts just don't support this conclusion, and the only explanation which we can offer to this change of attitude would be the fact, as mentioned by a number of sources, that these creatures have the ability to manipulate from a distance the minds, emotions and spirits of humans through occult technological or psycho-supernatural means, and that they would undoubtedly use this power to desensitize humanity to their actual nature. It may also be that Steiger succumbed to the pressure of the many New Age Aquarians with whom he interacts, who trust in channeled revelations which usually portray the Greys as benevolent space brothers who are here to help establish a quantum evolutionary transformation and cosmic initiation into the fourth dimension of universal New Age God consciousness. Whatever that means,